A few minutes after Hans left, 13 locked himself inside his room and meditated. He accessed his core and calculated which ingredients were most optimal for creating the antidote to cure the poison inside his grandma's body. The poison was quite unique, with half of it being a very potent poison, and the other half being a very potent curse. This combination not only prevented anyone from curing it completely, but it also deteriorated the rank of the victim, allowing the poison to seep deeper into their bones and tissues, allowing it to become part of their body. Simply put, removing the poison completely was tantamount to killing Lady Callista. The poison and her were already inseparable, making any kind of cure counterproductive, hastening her death. The only saving grace was that no one was able to find a cure, so they only tried to suppress it. Since his brain was still not mature enough for high-level calculations, 13 paced himself and spent nearly 2 hours finalizing the list of ingredients that he needed. He was certain that, with the help of the Leventis family, looking for the rare ingredients wouldn't be that hard. Since he didn't need to spend a single coin in this endeavor, 13 didn't hesitate to pick the most optimal ingredient, allowing Lady Callista to not only recover but to also make the poison that had caused her to suffer for several years transform into a deadly power that would be completely under her control. Once Grandma is cured, my family will have another backer in the Leventis family, 13 thought. After 2 years, Mikhail will have his first wandering. I'll make sure to train him enough so that his first quest will not be able to threaten his life. Truth be told, when 13 mentioned that it would take 2 years for Lady Callista to be cured, he meant that the potion would take 2 years to fully take effect. During that period, she would also undergo therapy, but that was only another one of 13's excuses. The so-called therapy was just an excuse. In reality, he would use that time to impart to his grandma a divine technique that would not only make her immune to all kinds of poison but also unleash the same kind of poison that she had suffered from onto her enemies. The evil part of this ability was that the moment the poison fully spread inside her victims' bodies, they would fall under her control. She would be like a vampire progenitor and be able to create her own covenant, made up of people who were infected by the poison in her body. Technically, Lady Callista was part of his family. He had argued this clause with the Laplace demon when they made the contract. That detail, such as it was revised to make Gerald's father, mother, and biological sister a part of 13's family who could benefit from his abilities. The same could be said for Alessia's mother, father, brothers, and sisters, who were biologically part of her family as well. Although it took a while for the Laplace demon to be convinced, it still reluctantly agreed in the end. 13's endgame was to make the patriarch of the Leventis family his pawn, heir backer, allowing him to monopolize the family's connections and resources to their fullest. Of course, he had also made contingency plans in case this didn't work. If he couldn't make the Leventis family his treasure cove of resources, he would just focus on making money. Lots of money. Regardless of what people thought, money still made the world go round. It was an inescapable path of human evolution. Those who controlled the flow of money controlled the world. While he was looking for ways to break his restrictions, he would simply hire strong wanderers and even pathfinders to become his subordinates, allowing him to move unhindered despite only reaching the rookie rank. It's quite unfortunate that I can't mass-produce rune equipment since it will break the current balance of the world, 13 thought. But there are still other ways to earn money. The boy smirked because there was a loophole in the agreement. Although he couldn't sell rune equipment to the masses, he could still sell it directly to his grandpa, Arthur. Of course, he had to place certain restrictions on the items, which would allow only Arthur to wield them. This way, not only would he be abiding by the agreement he had with Laplace Demon and the One, but he would also be able to earn millions of gold coins through his transactions with his grandpa. Simply put, 13 planned to make Arthur his ATM machine that regularly dispensed money for his sake. This was hitting 2 birds with 1 stone. Of course, he also planned to give his grandma some top-quality artifacts, but he would give them to her for free. It's quite unfortunate that I can't arm Hans with rune equipment, 13 sighed. Since the butler was his first ally, he wanted to strengthen him so that whenever he asked him to do something for him, Hans would be able to do it without fail. 13 looked at the list of ingredients in his hand and smiled. Once Grandma is cured, I will refine some of her blood and make everyone in the family immune to poison, 13 smirked. At least, we'll no longer have to be worried about being poisoned when we face poisonous creatures in Solterra. My host also suffered a lot back then due to poison. The boy sighed after remembering his previous host, who had died an unjust death at the hands of one of the 5 monarchs that ruled the world. Don't think about that scum for now, 13 muttered to himself. He will get his just dessert once I unlock my restrictions. For now, I just need to focus on strengthening my family and allies. He had already outlined the path that he would take in order to reach his goals as fast and securely as possible. Of course, he still needed to know how much Solterra had changed since he was there. Also, there were other things that were on his mind, like the treasures that his previous host had left behind for safekeeping. His previous host was a bit paranoid, so he didn't keep too many special items in his possession. 13 knew exactly where these treasures were hidden, so he could unearth them the moment he became a rookie. Of course, depending on how dangerous the location was, he would ask his family or Hans for help, allowing him to get some of the most powerful artifacts that used to belong to his host. His previous host was a throne pathfinder before he was stabbed to death. And all of the things he left behind were so precious that 13 could easily earn millions if he auctioned them off. But 13 had no plans to do that. He would refine these artifacts and apply rune magic to them. That way, they would become more powerful, allowing them to step into the legendary rank. Michael personally delivered the Mountain King's axe to 13's residence. He was supposed to deliver it a day ago, but due to how busy he was, the delivery was done a day late. When he saw the handsome man wearing glasses take the Mountain King's axe out as if it was nothing, 13 couldn't help but be surprised because he made it look so easy. The 5-year-old didn't know that his uncle was actually a strength-type wanderer who could easily lift the axe that nearly weighed a ton as if it was just a cup of coffee. After delivering the axe and placing it inside the room that 13 designated, he left after exchanging a few pleasantries with the boy's mother, Alessia. "Zion, is this the axe that you told me about?" Alessia asked. "The one that you plan to give your brother after his second wandering?" "Yes, mother," 13 replied. Alessia then held the handle of the axe and frowned. "This is too heavy," Alessia commented. "Even as a grandmaster, I would have a very difficult time using this. I doubt that Mikhail will be able to use it after becoming an adept." "Don't worry, mother," 13 smiled. "I already have it covered. Trust me, okay?" Alessia wanted to roll her eyes at her son, but after seeing him do incredible things, she decided to believe him. "Mother, there is also one thing I forgot to tell you," 13 said. 3 days from now, I'm going to go back to the Leventis family to see grandmother. I plan to bring Remy along with me." Alessia looked at her son in disbelief, and for a brief moment, she thought that she misheard him. "You plan to take Remy to the Leventis family to see Lady Callista?" Alessia asked. "Yes." 13 nodded. "I want her to see Remy." "Zion, are you perhaps planning to reconnect our ties to the Leventis family?" Not really. I just want Grandma to see how cute Remy is. I couldn't care less what the rest of the Leventis family does. But Grandma is Grandma. But the patriarch of the Leventis family is your grandpa as well, Alessia stated. 13 shrugged. So? He was the one that disowned father. Since that is the case, I don't see any point in trying to be nice to him. Alessia didn't say anything for a minute and simply stared at her son with a frown. "Zion, what are you planning?" Alessia asked. "It will not be a good idea to antagonize the Leventis family." "Mother, you think too much," 13 said as he placed his hand on the handle of the Mountain King's axe. "There's no way someone as insignificant as me can antagonize one of the 10 prestigious families. Also, I am not stupid to do that. Grandpa can easily snuff out our entire family just by lifting a finger. Why would I do something to offend him?" The boy then turned to his mother and held her hand. "Trust me, mother," 13 stated. "I will only do what is best for our family." Seeing how serious her son's expression was, Alessia sighed in her heart and nodded her head. "I believe you, Zion," Alessia replied. "Just make sure to protect Remy, okay? Not everyone in the Leventis family likes our family after all." "I will, mother." Zion smiled. "I promise." 3 days later. "Good morning," young Master Zion, young Lady Remy. Hans bowed towards the two children, who would be visiting Lady Callista today. 13 nodded back and handed a piece of paper to the butler, who took it without any hesitation. The boy watched as Hans read the list of ingredients that he would need to create the potion that would cure his grandma. To his surprise, the butler's expression remained calm even after reading the list. 13 was hoping that Hans would show a look of surprise on his face or maybe a frown. There were many rare and expensive ingredients on the list, and he thought he would get a reaction from him. What the 5-year-old didn't know was that, although Hans was indeed a butler from the Leventis family, he was actually very rich. Filthy rich to be exact. "I will procure these ingredients as soon as possible, young master," Hans said with a smile. "Just give me a few days." "You're good, Hans," 13 replied on seeing how composed the butler was. Hans had spent millions using his own savings to find a cure for Lady Callista in the past, even hiring the best alchemists and pharmacists to help him. But all of that money was wasted. Now that he was certain that he finally found the true cure for his master, he wouldn't mind spending 1/10 of his total savings in order to get everything that was listed on the piece of paper in his hands. After carefully pocketing the note as if it was a priceless treasure, Hans opened the door of his car, allowing 13 and Remy to enter. "Safety first," 13 said as he fastened Remy in with her seatbelt. "Safety first," Remy imitated her brother's words, earning her a pat on the head. Hans couldn't help but smile after seeing this lovely scene before he started to drive his car. He had already obtained Michael's permission for 13's and Remy's visit, informing the security personnel inside the residence about their arrival. "We're here, young master, young lady," Hans replied as he parked the car near the main door of the everlasting villa. 13 helped his sister get out of the car, and looked at the familiar place with a smile on his face. "Come, Remy," 13 said. "Let's go meet Grandma." "Grandma!" Remy smiled. The two didn't know that the moment they entered the residence, Arthur had already set his sights on them. After the party, he did a background check on the 5-year-old to learn more about his personality. According to the data collected by the investigators, Zion was a very timid child and rarely interacted with people, with the exception of his family. He was also involved in an accident, receiving serious injuries, which caused him to be hospitalized for a time. He changed after he was discharged from the hospital, Arthur thought as he remembered the notes that were added in the report. Did he develop a split personality because of his trauma? This was the only explanation that Arthur could think of after seeing 13's performance during the party. It was impossible for a timid 5-year-old to do what he did, making the patriarch of the Leventis clan wonder if letting 13 continue to meet with his wife would be a good thing or not. "I'll observe for the time being," Arthur thought. "There's nothing this brat can hide inside my own turf." With this, the patriarch of the Leventis clan closed his eyes and let his senses expand towards the everlasting villa, where 2 little pests had wormed their way inside the residence. "Grandma, I'm back as promised," 13 said with a smile. "And guess who I brought with me to see you?" The 5-year-old moved to the side and lightly patted his little sister's back, so she would take a few steps forward. Remy looked at the old lady in front of her with curiosity. Lady Callista, on the other hand, looked at the adorable child with a smile. "Your name is Remy, right?" Lady Callista said. "Come here." Perhaps because of her brother's encouragement and the old lady's kind gaze, Remy walked towards her grandma with a smile. "Grandma," Remy said sweetly, making Lady Callista and Tricia feel the strong urge to hug her. Lady Callista didn't fight this urge and pulled the little girl into her embrace and hugged her. "Grandma good?" Remy asked. Lady Callista kissed Remy's right cheek before looking at Hans, while still hugging the girl. "Can I keep her?" "No." 13 could only smile after seeing this scene. It seemed that his plan to make his grandma become fond of his adorable sister was a success. No one can resist Remy's charms, 13 thought. As expected of my little sister. Lady Callista couldn't help but kiss Remy's chubby cheeks over and over again, making the little girl giggle in her arms. When she finally had her fill, she asked Tricia to push her wheelchair towards the garden. Remy was still seated on her grandma's lap, and seemed to be very comfortable in her position. The old lady couldn't help but smile because it had been a while since she had interacted with a child as cute as Remy. Sure, there were other children inside the Leventis family estate, but since they weren't her direct descendants, she didn't care much about them. 13 and Remy were different. They were truly her grandchildren, so the feeling of wanting to spoil them came natural to her. Hans and 13 followed a few steps behind Trisha, who was pushing the wheelchair towards the garden. They had already set up a table there, filled with cookies, cakes, and other delicious snacks for the children. Remy was personally hand-fed by Lady Callista, while her brother just watched from the side. He didn't mind if his grandma showered his sister with all of her attention today. That was the main reason why he insisted on bringing Remy with him. 13 had already given the list of ingredients to Hans, so there was nothing else to do but wait until it was time for them to go home. He had also asked Hans to refrain from talking to him too much whenever he was in the Leventis residence, so that it would not make people too suspicious of him. His act during the party couldn't be considered high-handed because he had pulled back his punches most of the time, depriving the guests of their entertainment and making sure to uphold the Leventis family's motto: courage and strength. These were the traits that the Leventis family recognized. Weakness was something they hated, so 13 abided by these rules, while making sure that Terence wasn't humiliated. The mistakes of his subordinates might be reflected on his person, but in the end, this was still acceptable because they still hadn't received the training required of the retainers from the family. His face-off against Terence was also stopped midway, which was part of his plan. Him getting drunk would give him an excuse that he wasn't in the right state of mind when he challenged the boy. So anything he did during that time could be forgiven due to the influence of the alcohol. But he couldn't always fool everyone, so the best way to do this was, instead of coming to the Leventis residence all the time, to make his grandma come to him. Remy was the key to make that happen. She was cute, obedient, and loving. Because of this, it was only a matter of time before his grandma would love and spoil her rotten. Of course, even if Lady Callista spoiled Remy rotten, 13 would ensure that his sister would receive proper training as she grew up. I'll make sure to take the initiative to invite Grandma to visit us next time, 13 thought as he sipped his tea. Trisha, who was standing behind Lady Callista's wheelchair, would often glance at the 5-year-old boy from time to time. Arthur had asked her to pay close attention to the boy and report to him if she noticed anything suspicious in his actions. But, aside from acting like an intellectual child, which was normal for the prestigious families, the maid couldn't find anything suspicious in the boy's actions. She had been at the party, and she had to admit that she was surprised by how Zion had dealt with everything. But he wasn't the only one capable of doing this. Almost every heir of the other families shared these qualities, making them stand above their peers. In the end, they just thought of him as a more intellectual child born from the bloodline of the Leventis family. A few hours later, a teary-eyed Remy clung to her grandma, not wanting to let go. Lady Callista was also very reluctant to part with her granddaughter, whom she was seeing for the first time. Remy, it's fine. 13 patted her sister's head. Grandma will visit you soon. Isn't that right, Grandma? Grandma, Remy said as she looked at Lady Callista with puppy-like eyes. Visit me? Of course, I will visit you, Lady Callista answered in a heartbeat. I'll visit you tomorrow if you like. Remy happily hugged her grandma, making Trisha and Hans smile at the same time. Their mistress was smiling the entire time that Remy was with her, making them happy as well. Just as 13 and Remy were about to climb into the car, the 2-year-old walked back to her grandma and stood in tiptoes with her arms spread wide. Her lips were puckered, making the old lady chuckle as she presented her cheeks to her granddaughter, who gave her a sweet and wet kiss on the cheek. After kissing her grandma, she walked back to her brother and held his hand. Bye-bye, Grandma, 13 said with a smile. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Remy also waved her hand before going inside the car. Even when inside the car, Remy was still waving at Lady Callista, which made the older woman wave to her as well. A minute later, the car left the everlasting villa, making the old lady sigh as she leaned back in her wheelchair. She felt very happy ever since she met 13. The child was very sweet, obedient, and intelligent. But, after seeing Remy, her heart melted, making her remember the time when she was raising her own children, when they were still young and clung to her every day. "Trisha, make sure to prepare my best dress tomorrow," Lady Callista ordered. "Understood, my lady," Trisha replied. "Should I also ask Hans to buy a toy that we can give Remy tomorrow as a gift?" Lady Callista smiled and nodded her head. "Good idea. Make sure to buy gifts for Zion and his two siblings as well." Trisha nodded before pushing the wheelchair back inside the residence with a smile on her pretty face. The next day, Lady Callista came to visit 13 and his family. Since he had already informed his mother of her impending arrival, Alessia did her best to clean the house, as well as prepare food for their guests. It had been a long time since she last saw her mother-in-law, and she wanted to make her stay as comfortable as possible. "Grandma!" Remy shouted happily before running towards the old lady, who was seated in a wheelchair. The smile on Lady Callista's face widened after seeing her adorable granddaughter run in her direction. After catching the little one in a loving embrace, she kissed Remy's cheeks, and the latter kissed her back happily. "Thank you for coming to visit us, Mother," Alessia said as she walked towards her mother-in-law with a smile. "Alessia, it has been a while," Lady Callista nodded her head as Remy sat on her lap, making herself comfortable. It seemed that she liked to stay as close to her grandma as possible, and the old lady certainly wouldn't have it any other way. "It will be best if we all go inside the house first," 13, who was always the sensible one, said. "Welcome to our humble home, Grandma." Lady Callista looked at the 5-year-old and the two other children who were standing behind him. Gerald's two other children, Mikhail and Shasha, looked at Lady Callista with curiosity. Mikhail had seen his grandma in the past, but she didn't look this old back then. She was still a beauty, making it so he did not recognize her right away. Shasha, on the other hand, was still too young when Lady Callista last saw her, so she couldn't remember her grandma's face. But even if she did, she would still not recognize her now due to the effects of the poison that had spread inside the old lady's body. Still, after hearing 13's reminder, everyone went inside the house so that their guests could have refreshments. Trisha observed Mikhail and Shasha, who were Gerald's children. The patriarch had asked her to check what their abilities were and report her opinion of them to him. 13, who was also subtly paying attention to the maid, smirked internally. Since she wanted to see what his siblings were capable of, he would let her see it and report it back to the family. Even though his father was kicked out of the Leventis family, the fact remained that the Leventis blood still flowed in their veins. Any talented members of the family would be treated with great care and protected until they fully matured. "Brother, sister, since Grandma is here, why don't you have a sparring match to show your skills to them?" 13 proposed before glancing at Lady Callista, who was busy hugging and patting Remy. "Would you like that, Grandma?" "Sounds good," Lady Callista replied. She was also looking forward to seeing to what extent her grandchildren had trained outside of the Leventis family. As their grandmother, she was very worried that they were not receiving proper training from her son and daughter-in-law. The monarch clans and the 10 prestigious families each had a very strict training routine for their heirs and younger generations. This was to ensure that they would excel and rise above the masses, befitting as a member of their families. Simply put, each family took pride that their bloodline was strong and born to lead people, making them important figures not only in Solterra but in Pangea as well. If her grandchildren's performance wasn't up to par, then Lady Callista would insist that one of her trusted subordinates come to train them, especially Mikhail, who only had 2 years before his first wandering. "Is this Zion's way of asking me to help train his siblings?" Lady Callista mused. "This grandson of mine is really smart." Trisha had the same line of thought. She even felt that 13 was shameless for hugging his grandma's legs in order to gain guidance as well as resources from the Leventis family. Hans, on the other hand, remained silent. He hadn't seen how strong the 5-year-old siblings were either. Every time he had come to their residence, the two had either just finished their training or they were training somewhere else. Mikhail and Shasha were quite happy that their brother had asked them to spar. Aside from their daily routine, the two didn't have the chance to spar today because their mother asked them to be ready to meet their grandma at any time. The two of them went back to their rooms to change into proper training gear since Shasha was unable to fight properly wearing the beautiful dress that her mother had picked for her. While everyone was waiting for Mikhail and Shasha to return, they all headed to the training ground. Grandma, I have also started Remy's training, 13 commented. She's training as well? Lady Callista frowned. She's still too young to train. Even the Leventis households only start the training of their children at 5 years old. Well, it's not really vigorous training, 13 said. I'm just teaching Remy a technique for self-defense. It's called the Nutcracker Kick. Nutcracker Kick? Lady Callista blinked in confusion. What's that? I'll let you see it, Grandma, 13 stated. Remy, come for a bit. Let's show Grandma your Nutcracker Kick. Remy reluctantly went to her big brother because she also wanted to show off to her grandma. She then raised her shoulders, allowing 13 to hold them in place to support her body. The moment her brother gave the signal, Remy started to use her Nutcracker Kick, making Lady Callista and Trisha chuckle. Ei! 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 The little girl's kick was quite amusing, and after seeing her kicking style, they immediately understood what 13 was trying to teach his sister, amusing the two ladies. Hans, on the other hand, couldn't help but shake his head helplessly due to the 5-year-old's antics. After doing a few kicks, Remy returned to her grandma, wanting to be praised. Good girl, Lady Callista said as she patted her granddaughter's head. You did well. Remy smiled and hugged her grandma lovingly after being praised by her. It was also at this moment when Mikhail and Shasha appeared at the training ground. Their auras were different from when they came to meet Lady Callista, making the old lady arch an eyebrow. After bowing to each other as a sign of respect, the two took their fighting stances. Both were holding real weapons, but with blunted edges, which was very normal for their age. They just didn't expect that Mikhail would be wielding an axe, while Shasha held a rapier in her hand. A moment later, the two clashed against each other, surprising Lady Callista, Hans, and Trisha at the same time. They weren't using the family technique of the Leventis family like they thought they would. But the more the two fought, the more solemn the expressions of the three adults became. Although their battle styles were still rough around the edges, they could see the potential of the techniques they were using. This made Trisha, who was supposed to report this kind of development to her patriarch, subtly activate a recording crystal so that Arthur would be able to see Mikhail's and Shasha's battle for himself once she returned to the Leventis residence. Shasha unleashed a flurry of sword strikes, while Mikhail raised his axe to block them all. He knew that when it came to speed he was not a match against his sister, but that was fine. He had his own way of dealing with those who moved fast, and that was what he did. Taking minimal movements, he unleashed a slash, overpowering his sister, which caused her to uncontrollably skid backward. A fearless smile appeared on Shasha's face, while a grin was plastered on Mikhail's. 13 chuckled internally, seeing that the two simply fought to the best of their abilities, forgetting that they had spectators watching them. The exchange became more intense as both did their best to land a hit on their opponent. Lady Callista couldn't help but nod her head in satisfaction. Although both of them didn't seem to be used to the fighting style they were using, it was still at a passable level. She believed that before Mikhail and Shasha started their first wandering, they would be able to refine their fighting style, allowing them to have a higher survival rate the moment they stepped into the world of Solterra. Suddenly, with a roar, Mikhail lunged forward and used his superior strength to hit Shasha's rapier, making it fly backward, disarming her. However, Shasha wasn't fazed as she did several backflips in quick succession, catching her rapier before it fell on the ground. Just as the two were about to clash again, they heard a clapping sound, which made both of them look at their 5-year-old brother, who had a smile on his face. Okay, let's end the spar for now, 13 said. Good job, bro, sis. Mikhail and Shasha glanced at each other before lowering their weapons. This act made Lady Callista arch an eyebrow as she looked at the 5-year-old, who had stopped her siblings from continuing their spar. That alone proved that Mikhail and Shasha acknowledged their little brother and listened to his orders. Trisha was also very surprised because she didn't expect the two to listen to their younger brother as if he were the eldest in the family. Mikhail and Shasha then walked towards their grandmother with looks of expectation. They were wondering what she was going to say about their performance. Both of you did well, Lady Callista said. At first, I was surprised because the two of you weren't using the Leventis battle style. But the martial techniques that both of you are currently using suit both of you perfectly. By the way, who taught you those martial techniques? Father taught me mine, Mikhail replied. Mother taught me mine, Sasha replied. These were the replies that 13 had told them to use if this question came up. His father and mother had already been informed about this, and both of them agreed that this was the safest way to handle this matter. What grade are these martial techniques? Lady Callista inquired. This time, it was Alessia who answered the question. Both of them are gold-grade martial techniques, Alessia replied in a calm manner. Lady Callista, Hans, and Trisha looked at Alessia in shock. Gold-grade martial techniques were very rare and far in between. Even the Levente's sword art, Heaven's Divide, was a peak gold-grade martial technique. Where did you two get them? Lady Callista asked. Where else, mother? Alessia replied. Gerald got them while exploring ruins in Solterra. You know he's hard at work trying to support the family. The old lady nodded her head in understanding. Do you plan to auction or sell these martial techniques? Of course not, mother, Alessia replied. We're not that stupid. Mikhail and Shaha will inherit these martial styles, so when they have a family of their own, their children will inherit their legacies. Lady Callista found this answer acceptable and gave Trisha a sidelong glance. If this information reaches my husband, I'll kick you out of the villa, Lady Callista said with a smile. You will never work for me again and never be trusted by me again. Trisha nodded her head in understanding. My lady, although my employer is the patriarch, I have not forgotten that you were the one who took me into the family. I will not betray your trust. Good, Lady Callista nodded. You can give that recording crystal to my husband and let him think whatever he wants to think. But the grade of these martial techniques must be kept secret no matter what. Trisha nodded a second time. Understood, my lady. Suddenly, everyone felt a fluctuation in the residence, making Alessia smile. It seems that Gerald has come home early, Alessia said. Mother, let's all go and meet him. Lady Callista smiled. Since I'm already here, why not? Mikhail and Sasha went ahead to meet their father, while Alessia guided her mother-in-law to the private gateway that their family had inside the residence. Suddenly, Sasha's scream reverberated in the surroundings, alarming Alessia, Hans, and 13. Without another word, Alessia and Hans darted toward the place where they heard the scream, drawing their weapons as they ran. Lady Callista then asked Trisha to take her there, which the latter obeyed. Stay here with Remy, Lady Callista said as she handed the little girl over to 13. We'll check the situation first. After saying those words, the two left, leaving 13 and Remy behind. The 5-year-old frowned, but he didn't move from his spot while hugging Remy, who had a curious look on her face. Since he was not aware of what made his sister, Sasha, scream, he decided to not do anything reckless and wait until the adults had dealt with the situation. They were still far too weak to do anything, and if an enemy had managed to infiltrate their residence, they wouldn't even last a few seconds before being killed. He would only learn a few minutes later that his father, Gerald, had suffered serious injuries and barely managed to return home after surviving an assassination attempt. Before he lost consciousness, Gerald was able to say the name of the organization that targeted him, and it was none other than one of the top assassin organizations in Solterra that went by the name Death Wish. Trisha, go back to the residence and tell my husband about what happened, Lady Callista said. I will be staying here for a few days. Ask Michael to send a few grandmasters to protect this place for the time being. Yes, my lady, Trisha bowed before leaving the room where Gerald was currently resting. Lady Callista's personal maid was a grandmaster healer. It was because of her specialty that she was assigned to Lady Callista. Her job was to take care of and serve as her personal healer just in case she needed it. While Trisha was healing Gerald, she couldn't help but frown due to how serious his injuries were. Some of the stab wounds he received were dangerously close to his vital organs. As one of the subordinates of the Leventis family, she was well aware of the assassin organization that went by the name Death Wish. They were willing to kill anyone as long as the price was right. Also, their success rate was very high, so Gerald being able to escape was a miracle in itself. Trisha had no doubt in her mind that if Gerald was an hour late in receiving medical help, He would have bled to death, making his wife Alessia a widow and leaving his kids without a father. After the maid had sealed most of Gerald's injuries, she proposed that Gerald be taken to the hospital. However, Lady Callista shook her head. They didn't know who had placed a bounty on Gerald's head, and it was very possible that he would not be safe in the hospital. Because of this, Lady Callista took an elixir out of her storage ring and handed it to Trisha, making the latter's body stiffen. "Use this to save my son," Lady Callista ordered. Trisha nodded and helped the unconscious man to drink the elixir, which was capable of saving someone suffering from grievous injuries as long as they still had breath in them. Elixirs were extremely rare healing items, and there were only 3 of them in the Leventis family. Lady Callista had now used hers, which was considered a priceless treasure to ordinary families. Gerald's complexion became better, and his breathing more stable. Alessia, who was doing her best to hold back her tears, finally gave in and covered her face with both hands. Extreme anxiety flooded her senses when she saw her husband covered in blood upon arriving at the gateway of their family. Fortunately, she wasn't an ordinary human, so she didn't faint. She was also able to think rationally and immediately took out a potion in her possession and sprinkled it over her husband's body, allowing him to regain a bit of his strength before he was treated by Trisha. "Again, go back to the residence and report what happened here, Trisha," Lady Callista ordered. "I will be staying here for a few days, so tell Michael to send some grandmasters to guard this place during my stay." "Yes, my lady," Trisha bowed before leaving the room as fast as she could. She understood why her mistress decided to stay at her son's house. As long as she was there, the patriarch of the Leventis family would have no choice but to send the family sentinels to guard her and keep 13's family safe. While all the adults were inside the master's bedroom, 13 was taking care of his siblings. Mikhail and Shasha had tears in their eyes, while Remy was seated on 13's lap. For little children, things like sadness and laughter were very infectious. If not for the fact that 13 had told Remy that their brother and sister were just acting, she would have been crying as well because they looked very sad right now. "Death wish," 13 thought. "Fortunately, I was able to impart Heaven's Blade to Father. If not..." The skill Heaven's Blade was a new martial technique that combined Heaven's Divide and Eternal Blade. This skill allowed its wielder to move fast and hit hard at the same time. It also had a life-saving move called Overdrive, which allowed its wielder to increase their strength and speed by 500% in the span of 5 minutes. It was this martial technique's last resort, and Gerald's body showed signs of using it. The only downside to this technique was that, after the 5 minutes had passed, they would then enter a lethargic state, which would make them unable to move their body for an entire day. They either have to overcome their opponents and win, or die in the process. It was the ultimate trump card of Heaven's Blade, making it extremely potent in combat. Someone's targeting Father, but who? 13 thought. The Leventis family had many enemies, so it was possible that one of their rivals had targeted Gerald in order to send a message to the entire family. Since he had been disowned, he had also lost the protection of his family, making him an easy picking. If Gerald hadn't learned Heaven's Blade in time, they might have succeeded. But now that their plan had failed, they would probably lie low for the time being and wait for everything to cool off. "I don't have enough information." 13 sighed in his heart. "It seems that I need to push my plans aside for a bit to deal with unforeseen variables." He originally thought that he would be able to take it easy and slowly grow up until his first wandering. Now that his father had been attacked, he needed to create countermeasures for the safety of his family. The only saving grace was that the assassin organization, Death Wish, only operated in Solterra. Even so, 13 didn't plan to take any chances. Later, he would talk to his parents about his plan to help protect their family better. Since Death Wish had failed their assassination attempt, they would definitely send more powerful experts to deal with his father the next time he went to Solterra. There was a saying among the Wanderers that no one escapes a death wish twice, because their second attempt would be several times deadlier than the first. Faced with this threat, he was certain that his father wouldn't be going to Solterra anytime soon and would have to stay in their home to fully recover while planning his next move. 3 days had passed since Gerald narrowly escaped from the assassins of Death Wish. The patriarch had sent his most trusted subordinates to protect 13's home and kept the incident under wraps. No one from the Leventis family was aware of what happened to Gerald. But even if they knew, they would probably not care, and some might even rejoice. Alessia was very worried about her husband, but since he had already drank an elixir, she knew that he'd wake up sooner or later. During this time, 13 urged Hans to put all his focus on purchasing the ingredients needed to brew the potion that would stabilize his grandma's condition. With the current development, his plans had to be adjusted. He no longer had the leeway to take his sweet time when it came to strengthening and protecting his family. He understood that his father wouldn't be able to return to Solterra anytime soon, so he devised a plan that would allow him to support their family for a few years even if Gerald didn't go to Solterra to do quests and gather Jinn cores and monster parts. Later that afternoon, Gerald finally woke up, to the relief of his family. Even Lady Callista couldn't help but tear up when she saw that her son was finally awake. Of course, Gerald was dumbfounded to see his mother in their home, and when he heard that she had given him her one and only elixir, he felt very guilty. But he didn't let this show up on his face because doing so would only waste the sacrifice that his mother had made for him. Instead, he told everyone about what happened down to the last detail. According to him, he was just about to return to the city of Lancaster in order to deposit his spoils before going out on another expedition. But on the way back, he was ambushed by 6 grandmasters. Even though he was also a grandmaster, Gerald was at a great disadvantage because his 6 opponents were elite assassins. Fortunately, his senses, which had been enhanced due to his years of experience, as well as his newly modified martial technique, allowed him to barely evade the sneak attack that was launched from behind him. After the assassins failed to kill him with the first blow, a skirmish happened, with Gerald being attacked by the assassins from every direction. While the fact remained that he was at a great disadvantage, Gerald's strength had increased by leaps and bounds after learning Heaven's Blade. Even though he had 6 opponents who were of the same rank, he was still able to gain the upper hand and push them back. When the assassins realized that they couldn't kill him using normal means, they took berserk potions in order to increase their strength and kill him as fast as they could. This was what pushed Gerald to use his last resort, which was overdrive. After raising his strength and speed, he managed to kill 2 of the assassins and severely wound 2 more. However, he knew that he couldn't keep up his advantage because his enhanced capabilities had a time limit. Desperate to escape, Gerald ran as fast as he could and was fortunate enough to come across a group of friends and acquaintances who were also on their way to the city. When they saw Gerald's bloody form, they didn't hesitate to help him, forcing the assassins to withdraw. Gerald was not only strong, but he was also a very friendly and kind person. Since his home base was Lancaster, many people had seen and heard of him. Some had even accompanied him on his expeditions and profited greatly from their journey. Because of this, they immediately brought him back to the city and even insisted that he go to the nearest hospital to be healed. However, knowing that the assassins might have agents in Lancaster, Gerald begged his friends to take him to the teleportation gate instead. He insisted that he would get medical help once he got home, so his friends relented and helped him enter the teleportation gateway. After stepping back to their residence, Gerald's tenacity finally faded, and he collapsed on the ground, bleeding all over. "Thank you, Mother," Gerald said. "I'll compensate you someday. I promise." Enough with the nonsense, Lady Callista snapped at her son. "What compensation are you talking about? Do you think I need to be compensated by you? You should just focus on your recovery. Do not forget that you are now a father with 4 kids. What do you think will happen to them if you die? Before you think of compensating me, shouldn't you think about how you will be able to support your family instead? Since you are being targeted by Death Wish, they won't stop until you are dead. For the time being, it is best that you do not return to Solterra. Don't worry, I have enough savings to support your family for a few years." Gerald wanted to say that he didn't need his mother's support, but her glare shut him up. He was a prideful person, and the mere thought of being supported by someone else made him feel bitter. But he was willing to swallow his pride in order to ensure that his family would be able to live comfortably for a few years until he figured out what to do next. It was at that moment that he noticed a 5-year-old boy standing at the corner of the room. The child's arms were crossed over his chest, and his eyes were closed. 13 was leaning against the wall as if he was sleeping. But his steady breaths were more than enough to tell Gerald that his son was just listening to the conversation without any thought of getting in the way. It was thanks to his 5-year-old son that he was able to survive the assassination attempt that was meant to take his life and managed to barely return home to his family. "Mother, Alessia, I want to talk to Zion in private," Gerald said. "Can you please leave us alone for the time being?" Alessia glanced at her son and nodded her head. After he was discharged from the hospital, the 5-year-old had become a pillar of support in their family. They no longer treated him as a child and took his words and advice seriously. "We'll just be in the living room," Alessia took the initiative to take command of the conversation. "Just tell Zion to call for us if you need something." "Mother, let's go." Lady Callista nodded before giving her grandson a sidelong glance. Tricia then pushed her wheelchair out of the room, leaving Gerald and his son behind. "Zion, what do you think I should do?" Gerald asked, hoping that his son would be able to point him in the right direction. "Pops, you don't have to worry about anything," 13 replied. "During the 2 days that you were sleeping, I have devised a plan to make you the perfect house husband." "Ha!" Gerald looked at his son in disbelief. "Can you repeat that? I think I misheard you." 13 chuckled before walking toward his father and patting his hand. "You didn't mishear me, Pops," 13 stated. "Prepare yourself to be the perfect house husband. I got you covered." Gerald didn't know if he should laugh or cry at the smugness of his 5-year-old, who had just told him what role he was going to play for his family. He would only come to know later that his son's version of the perfect house husband would allow him to do things he never thought possible while in the safety of their own home. 2 more days passed since Gerald regained consciousness. On the 5th day, Michael personally visited 13's home, with the intention of inviting Lady Callista back to the residence. The two privately talked for a while, and in the end, the old lady reluctantly agreed to return home with Michael in exchange for leaving 6 grandmasters to continue watching over her son's house, protecting them from the shadows. 13 was very happy with this conclusion and even wanted to kiss his uncle for coming at the right time. With so many people inside their house, there were certain things that he couldn't do. As for the bodyguards outside the house, he didn't mind them one bit. Even if they were there, he was confident that none of them would be able to catch wind of what he was cooking up, which was a good thing. A day ago, Hans had given all of the ingredients that he gathered to 13, and the boy concocted the potion using a portable stove and a pot that Hans also provided for him. Of course, he did it inside his bedroom and only handed Hans the finished potion an hour before he returned to the Leventis family with his grandma. 13 told Hans that he should let Lady Callista drink the potion only when it was just the two of them. The boy didn't trust Tricia enough to let her become part of his inner circle. Only when he was certain of her loyalty and allegiance would he consider adding her to the team and ask her to help him do the things that he was unable to do because of the restrictions on his body. As soon as 13 handed the potion to Hans, he immediately told the butler that he planned to use one of the 3 favors that the butler promised to him. But before telling Hans what he wanted from him, 13 first asked how much money Hans had in his bank account. The butler didn't bat an eye and told 13 the exact amount of his savings. "I want half of your savings," 13 stated. "Make sure to create an anonymous account and send the money there. After that, pass the username and password to me. I will handle the rest." It was unknown whether Hans was surprised or bitter about 13's first favor since he didn't have a change of expression and simply nodded in agreement. Remembering that scene, 13 sighed and wished that Hans was part of their family. That way, he would be able to arm the butler to the teeth with his rune equipment. "The next time I see Laplace Demon and the One, I will definitely ask them to add Hans as one of my beneficiaries." When his grandma and her entourage had finally left, 13 immediately went to talk to his father and mother about his plans. He already convinced his father a day ago to ask Lady Callista for a loan of 10 million gold coins. Getting half of Hans' savings netted him 50 million additional gold coins, giving their family a hefty sum. But 13 didn't plan to use this money to simply support his family. He planned to burn all of this money to make more money. "Pops, are you ready to become the perfect house husband?" 13 asked as he used a marker to scribble several runes on Gerald's body. "What choice do I have?" Gerald replied bitterly. Are you sure this plan of yours is going to work, Zion? Of course. 13 nodded. Do you still doubt me after learning Heaven's Blade? You should know that your son is not only a genius but a supreme genius. Gerald looked at the 5-year-old who was calling himself a supreme genius and wondered where his confidence was coming from. Even so, he had to admit that if 13's plan were to really work, not only would he be able to provide for his family, but it would also open several options for his advancement. Right now, 13 was planning to impart another divine technique to his father, and it was called Hammer for All Seasons. Although the name sounded funny, it was actually one of the strongest blacksmithing divine arts recorded inside his core. A week later, he would impart another divine technique to his father called Good as Gold. This was a crafting technique that specialized in making accessories and jewelry. In a few years, he also planned to teach his mother the divine technique called the 10,000 concoctions. This was a divine rank alchemy technique that would allow Alessia to become an alchemist. The only reason why he couldn't make her an alchemist right now was due to the fact that 13 didn't have enough resources to let his father and mother burn through countless materials and ingredients to perfect their craft. 60 million gold might seem like a large sum to others, but in the face of the 5 monarch clans and the 10 prestigious families, such an amount was mere pocket money for them. Although 13 had imparted the skills to his parents, it would still depend on their comprehension abilities whether they would be able to succeed or not. Body compatibility, as well as a few other factors, would make his parents comprehend the skills faster. Knowing the divine technique and actually using it were two different matters. Just because you watched a cooking video on YouTube didn't mean that you would become a Michelin star chef with the snap of a finger. 13 was already prepared for the reality that his father would burn through several precious metals while learning his craft, but this was a necessary investment for the future. Once Gerald had reached a level where 13 deemed him to be ready, they would then start to craft mythical-grade equipment that he planned to sell to his grandpa, allowing them to recover their losses and gain a profit in return. As 13's chant spread inside the room, the Jinn cores and Magian cores that he had placed around his father all imploded into particles of light, seeping inside his body. The 5-year-old was adamant about turning his father's tragedy into an opportunity, which would shake the Leventis household, the monarch clans, and the other prestigious families to the core a few years from now. Lady Callista took a deep breath as she allowed her newly acquired martial technique, Death's Embrace, to circulate inside her body. It had been 6 months since Hans had given her a potion that was supposedly able to cure her condition. This wasn't the first time Hans had done such a thing. Over the years, her butler had met with the most prestigious healers, alchemists, herbalists, and a few other noteworthy individuals who were said to be able to cure any diseases. Unfortunately, none of them succeeded in the end. But Hans didn't give up. Lady Callista only drank the potion because she believed that her butler, who was also her best friend, wouldn't hurt her in any way. After drinking the potion, she didn't feel any changes aside from feeling less fatigued. In the end, she thought that this was just another fluke and felt sorry for Hans for wasting his time and effort for the umpteenth time. However, the butler only smiled and assured her that she was on her way to recovery. Not wanting to make him feel bad, she just nodded her head and sighed internally. But as the days passed, she felt that her health was gradually improving. Even Trisha was surprised because Lady Callista was now able to stand up on her own for short periods of time, allowing her to go to the bathroom on her own. A month later, the old lady sensed that her rank, which had been constantly deteriorating, had not just ceased to decline but had also begun to show hints of recovery. On that same day, Hans handed her a purple Jinn core while Trisha was making her regular reports to the Patriarch. The butler said that the Jinn core contained a martial technique that would allow Lady Callista to use the power inside her body as an offensive ability. Of course, she half-doubted Hans' words, but since the potion that he had given her seemed to be working, she thought that she had nothing to lose if she tried. The moment she held the Jinn core in her hand, it immediately dispersed and turned into particles of light. There were several symbols that appeared in front of her, which merged with various locations of her body. Suddenly, Lady Callista entered a state of enlightenment and fell into a trance. Hans guarded his mistress for nearly 2 hours before she broke out of her daze. Immediately, The old lady started to circulate the martial technique inside her body and was surprised with the results. The poison that had made her suffer for many years followed her will, and it washed over her body, enhancing its abilities. Her strength rose a little, making her recall that she hadn't been training for the past few years of her life. Back then, she used to train every day. However, after the poison had spread inside her body, the mere act of stretching her muscles hurt her so much, so she stopped training altogether. But now, things had changed and, according to Hans, it would change for the better. Taking a deep breath to stabilize her condition, Lady Callista ended her morning routine. When she opened her eyes, it was filled with life and vitality, making the butler in front of her smile faintly. "Hans, have you prepared the car?" Lady Callista asked. "I don't want to keep my grandkids waiting." "It's ready, my lady." Hans bowed. "Good." Lady Callista smiled. "Trisha, let's go." "Yes, my lady," Trisha replied. Since the first time that Lady Callista had visited 13th's family, she adjusted her schedule and went to see them twice a week. To her surprise, Arthur didn't make any move to stop her, which made her wonder what her husband was up to. She was not aware that after the patriarch saw Mikhail's and Shasha's potential, he decided to let his wife visit them on a regular basis. This way Trisha could check their progress and report it to him. Also, he knew that after a few back and forths, he wouldn't be able to stop his wife anyway, so he decided to just let her do what she wanted as long as she didn't visit them every single day. There was also the matter with the assassin organization, Death Wish. Arthur didn't know if they were targeting Gerald directly or if their targets were the entirety of the Leventis family. In order to check whether Gerald was their sole target, he paid extra attention to what was happening in Solterra. Fortunately, none of his other family members nor any of the members of the Branch family received any reports of any assassination attempts. Arthur had sent a few grandmasters to protect his disowned son's residence due to Michael's proposal. Michael stated that as long as Gerald was under threat, Lady Callista would not leave his side, which would complicate things further. In order to avoid that, he assigned a few bodyguards to keep their family safe, at least until they were certain that no one in Pangea was targeting them directly. It took only half an hour for Lady Callista, Hans, and Trisha to arrive at their destination. The moment she entered the gates, an adorable little girl immediately appeared in their vision. Remy walked toward her grandma with a wide smile on her face and her arms spread wide. The old lady then waited until her grandchild neared her wheelchair before she gave her a gentle hug, and placed the little girl on her lap like she always did whenever she was in their residence. "Where's Gerald?" Lady Callista asked Alessia, who was taking care of Remy a moment ago. "Is he still in the smithy?" Ever since her son recovered from his injuries, he started trying his hands at blacksmithing. Lady Callista welcomed this change because as long as Gerald stayed home, he wouldn't have to worry about being targeted by the assassin organization, Death Wish, which only operated in Solterra. Although she didn't have too high of an expectation that Gerald would succeed at his new hobby, she decided to support him financially, which irked her husband. "How about Zion?" Lady Callista asked. "What is he doing now?" Aside from Remy, the old lady paid extra attention to the 5-year-old, who made her feel at ease. It was a weird feeling, especially since she was stronger than the boy. But whenever she was around 13, she felt as if she was talking to an equal who possessed the same strength as her. "He's with his father in the smithy," Alessia replied with a bitter smile on her face. Aside from training in the mornings, he joins his father in the smithy until dinner time. It seems that he is also interested in blacksmithing. "Is that so?" Lady Callista nodded. "Maybe I should talk to my connections and look for someone who would train Zion as a blacksmith apprentice. He's still young, and if he starts training now, he will definitely become an expert when he grows up." If 13 only knew about Lady Callista's thought, he would probably snort in disdain. Him a blacksmith apprentice? Is that a joke? All the blacksmiths in the world would bow down and kiss his feet the moment they found out that he could give them a divine skill that would allow them to craft mythical and legendary weapons. The 5 monarchs and the head of the central government were the only 6 people who were able to gain mythical ranked equipment. They had gained those from Laplace Demon and the one as a reward for conquering the Tier 9 gate, where 13's host had died. Aside from them, there was no one else who was able to even see a mythical ranked weapon, which was a rank lower than the legendary rank. 13 was busy training his father so that he would, at the very least, be able to craft mythical ranked equipment before Mikhail's time to start his first wandering came. Away from the eyes and ears of people, the two worked hand in hand to hammer the precious metals in their collection. Both of them had failed many times, but they didn't give up. 13 had already calculated their expenditures, as well as the time needed to hone their craft to the point where they could create mythical ranked equipment for the patriarch of the Leventis clan, Arthur. The moment they succeeded, they wouldn't have to worry about money and resources again because the patriarch would surely commission the black sheep of his family to produce mythical ranked items exclusively for him. The sound of hammer hitting metal echoed across the smithy as Gerald continuously pounded the metal atop his anvil. At first, he didn't feel like he was suited for being a blacksmith, but the more he trained, the more he realized that he was actually having fun with what he was doing. The act of creation had ignited a flame inside his chest, which he wasn't aware of. Although he had failed several times throughout the past month, he was starting to show progress. He was now able to successfully forge simple swords and broadswords, as well as long swords. 13 was also surprised to see his father suddenly become so passionate about the craft that he was able to integrate the martial technique, hammer for all seasons, into his muscle memory. Gerald was blessed with a strong body, which was a given since he had been practicing the Leventis sword art. He was also hailed as a genius among the family members, so learning things was quite easy for him. Perhaps the blacksmithing skill proved to be a challenge to him, which was why he suddenly became passionate about it. He was the type who believed that hard work would pave the way to success, and right now, each piece of equipment that he finished counted as a small victory. The sound of something sizzling reached 13's ears as his father submerged the blade he was hammering a moment ago into the water. When it had cooled down a bit, Gerald showed the finished product to his son, who was eyeing the great sword with a critical gaze. "Still mediocre," 13 replied after he finished inspecting his father's newest creation. "It's a 4 out of 10. Pops, put some muscle into it. Otherwise, we won't be able to make a mythical great sword for Gramps before Mikhail goes to Solterra. Maybe I should tell Mom to stop giving you vegetables to eat. You need more meat, 'cause you lack strength." A sigh escaped Gerald's lips because his son was as brutal as ever. However, he didn't mind one bit because he was slowly but surely getting the hang of blacksmithing. It had been half a year since he had picked the hammer, and due to his constant use of it, his muscles were now bulging like a professional bodybuilder. He also felt an increase in strength, as well as an increase in the accuracy of his hammer strikes. 13 even thought that maybe his father needed to change his main weapon of choice from the sword to the hammer. Maybe I should have him learn a new martial technique called, "It's hammering time." It's a pretty destructive hammer martial arts that excelled in both offense and defense. The good thing about it is that it complements the Heaven's Blade fighting technique, allowing Gerald to become proficient in both. While 13 was seriously considering imparting this skill to his father, the sound of the smithy door opening caught his attention. Lady Callista's wheelchair entered the smithy, which made 13 scratch his head. I had forgotten that she was scheduled to visit today, 13 thought. Her complexion is better, and she seemed to have finally solidified the foundation of her martial technique, Death's Embrace. After a year or two, she should finally be able to materialize simple weapons, empowered by the poison inside her body. 13 was very satisfied with his grandmother's progress. Once she regained her rank as a champion, he would have 2 champions in his inner circle, alongside Hans. "Well then, did you manage to make something worth looking at?" Lady Callista asked as Tricia pushed her wheelchair inside the smithy. "Nothing yet, Mother," Gerald replied. "But in a year or 2, I'll definitely surprise you." A heartfelt chuckle escaped Gerald's lips because he believed that once he mastered the hammer for all seasons, he would be unstoppable. Lady Callista also smiled because she understood that becoming a blacksmith wasn't an easy profession. The 5 monarch families and the 10 prestigious clans had their own team of blacksmiths, who worked endlessly to arm their faction with the best weapons that could be made from the monster parts from Solterra. It was a very lucrative profession, but only a few excelled at it. This made every Grandmaster Blacksmith or Champion Blacksmith a gem within their family. They were also given a high position in the family, gaining the respect of everyone in it. One of Gerald's brothers was a grandmaster blacksmith, and he was given special attention by the family. They were hoping that once he stepped into the champion ranks, he would be able to forge silver to gold-grade ranked equipment regularly. Also, they hoped that he would get lucky and create a mythical ranked equipment, which would definitely increase his prestige. Although no one had yet to succeed, some blacksmiths had stated that they had almost crafted one themselves, but ultimately created peak gold-grade equipment instead. Gerald didn't want to brag, but he knew that it was only a matter of time before he surpassed all the blacksmiths in the world. The day he crafted a piece of mythical ranked equipment was the day that the Leventis family would get on their knees and beg for him to return. However, Gerald had no intention of doing that. He planned to make his own branch of their family and assign his son, Zion, as its family head after the latter had finished his coming-of-age ceremony, which was usually done when a teenager from a family turned 18 years old. While Lady Callista was talking to her son, 13 and Hans exchanged a knowing glance with each other. The faint smile on the butler's face was enough to tell him that he was very satisfied with his transaction with 13 despite the fact that the latter had asked for half of his savings. The reason why Hans didn't mind this one bit was due to the fact that he didn't have anything else to use his savings for. It was for the same reason that he could focus his attention on finding the cure for Lady Callista. Money was simply not a problem for him. Looking at the butler, 13 was more determined than ever to bargain with the Laplace demon and the one to add Hans to the list of people who could benefit from his abilities. If he ever gained their approval, he would do everything in his power to help Hans increase his rank, stepping into the rank of a throne. In Solterra, thrones were also referred to as kings and queens. Because once someone became a throne, they would have enough strength to establish a territory for themselves. Of course, he also planned to make his father and mother champions. But for that to happen, his father must first succeed in crafting a mythical ranked equipment, which 13 would further empower with his rune arts, making it the strongest rune equipment within the mythical rank category. We have less than 2 years left, 13 thought. We have enough time to make it happen. Although 13 could help craft rune equipment, he was unable to use it due to the restrictions placed on his body. The skill ban prevented him from activating the power of the runes, which was also part of the compromise that he had negotiated with Laplace Demon and the One. Even so, 13 wasn't too worried about it. He believed that he didn't have to think about such things until he was about to start his third wandering. The first and second were still doable even with the restrictions on his body. It was only at the start of the third wandering that he would feel the gap in power between him and his peers, whose strength and power would have increased threefold, leaving him behind. Time passed ever so swiftly as Gerald tirelessly perfected his craft. When news about his new profession circulated among the Leventis family, many of them laughed and ridiculed him behind closed doors. Although the Leventis family had tried to keep a tight lid on the incident, news of the assassination attempt still managed to reach the ears of the members of the monarch clans, as well as the prestigious families. Because of this, all of them simply thought that he was too scared to return to Solterra because Death Wish had set their sights on him. Some thought that he had made a good decision since life was the most precious thing. His enemies, however, just called him a coward and a turtle. Those who considered him to be their rival were very disappointed, while the rest simply thought that this was juicy gossip. In the end, Gerald didn't pay any attention to whatever the world thought of him and continued to hammer away in his forge, day in and day out. 13, on the other hand, took care of his brother and sisters, training them regularly, especially Mikhail, who would be forced to take his first wandering in 3 months. He had turned 13 a week ago, and the family celebrated it in a simple manner. Lady Callista had been present and joined the celebration. The way she looked now was very different from how she looked more than a year ago. She looked way younger than before, like a lady in her early 30s. Her long black hair rested behind her back, and her beautiful face, which was the envy of girls her age, was smooth and without wrinkles. 13's martial technique allowed her to harness the poison that had plagued her for many years, turning it into a power that was completely under her control. This transformation had not only made her look younger, but it also made her stronger. Her current strength had not only returned to the champion rank but had also increased, reaching its peak stage. She was now stronger than ever, and many in the family were surprised by the miraculous change that happened to her body. Arthur was very happy with this development and even told Lady Callista that maybe it was about time that they had another child. However, she still hadn't forgiven her husband for disowning Gerald, so any talk about having another child was tossed aside the moment it was brought up. 13, who was now 7 years old, looked at his grandma with a faint smile on his face. She was still not aware that he was the one who helped her recover from her condition, and he had no intention of telling her about it. In the end, Hans played his part well and kept his secret from the Leventis family. Inside the smithy, Gerald smashed his hammer on the blade for the last time before cooling it down with water. He looked exhausted, but there was a faint smile on his face as he showed his son his latest creation. 8 out of 10, 13 nodded. You pass, Pops. Yes. Gerald did a fist pump out of happiness. This was the 10th time that he had successfully created a great sword that passed 13 standards. But that was not all. He succeeded 10 consecutive times, which made the 7-year-old confident that his father was now ready to craft the mythical sword for the patriarch of the Leventis clan, Arthur. As part of Gerald's training, he had been using low-quality materials at the start. But now that he was considered proficient, 13 would raise the bar and let him work on more precious metals. A year and a half passed like this, and before Gerald knew it, blacksmithing had become second nature to him. 13 could roughly guess that his father had already mastered 80% of the techniques from the martial technique, hammer for all seasons. He just needed to take that gamble and start using the very expensive materials that came from the monsters of Solterra. There were currently 10 monster rankings that were known to everyone in Pangea. Rank 1 up to rank 9, and lastly Prince. Many believed that if the highest ranking monster was called Prince or Princess, there must be something stronger than it, like a king. However, since the strongest members of humanity were the monarch rank, which was as strong as the prince and princess rank, they didn't want to think that there was someone more powerful than them. Because if that were true, then the moment they made their appearance, even the monarchs would not stand a chance against them. For the past 300 years, no one had seen a djinn or magen with a rank higher than Prince. Because of this, everyone thought that Prince was the highest. At least, this was what they wanted to believe. In order to craft mythical ranked equipment, they needed rank 9 monster parts. However, 13 didn't want to spend too much money on buying those parts since they were very expensive. If his father were to fail when using these materials to craft, then the losses that they would suffer would be staggering. Because of this, he settled for rank 7 monster parts. When using these materials, the highest grade of equipment that could be made would be at the peak of the mithril rank. If one was lucky, then it was possible for the finished product to reach the first stage of the adamantine rank. The stage after the adamantine rank was mythical, a rank coveted by all the crafters in the world. As long as Pops can make a mid or peak stage equipment, I will handle the rest with rune magic, 13 thought. That way, I can increase the equipment rank to mythical. 13 gazed at the 4-meter-long tusk in front of him, which belonged to the rank 7 Jinn Empyrean boar. In terms of hardness, it was equivalent to a low-grade rank 8 monster part, which 13 believed was the ideal ingredient to craft a great sword. Also, he had asked his father to use one of the tusks he had bought a month ago as part of his training. This gave him the chance to gain familiarity with the item that they would use as the main ingredient for the great sword that they were planning to craft. Since the tusk was big, Gerald was able to use it 5 times in the past. In those 5 times, he failed 4 consecutive times and succeeded in the last. 13 had already considered the possibility of Gerald failing a few more times before he succeeded. This was why he bought 4 Empyrean boar tusks just in case his father failed his first few attempts. Each boar tusk cost 10 million gold coins. One of them had already been used up in his father's training, so only 3 remained. They only had a little more than 2 million gold coins remaining in their savings, so unless Gerald succeeded once, their losses would simply be astronomical. Gerald knew this too, and the pressure also made him feel anxious. However, 13 told him that he didn't have to worry about the funds. He just asked his father to work like he always did. Although he tried to act calm and supportive on the surface, the 7-year-old was also feeling the pressure of his father failing their gamble. Even so, he believed in his father's potential. With a determined look in his eyes, Gerald used one of the 3 tusks in their possession and tried to forge the great sword that they planned to sell to his father. Unfortunately, his first 5 attempts failed, making him use the entire tusk. With only 2 tusks remaining, Gerald remained positive that he would succeed since he was very close to succeeding in his last attempt. But the heavens seemed to be mocking him that day since the next 5 attempts failed as well. Seeing that anxiety was starting to creep in on his father's face, 13 decided to let him take a break for 3 hours and asked him to meditate. The boy knew that the constant failures were taking a toll on Gerald's mind, so he decided to give him a little help, which would further increase the chances of success by a small percentage. After Gerald finished his meditation, he silently looked at the last tusk of the Empyrean boar left. "This is my final chance," Gerald thought. "If I fail here..." "You're not going to fail, Pops." Gerald was broken out of his daze by the voice of his son, who was standing beside him. "How can you possibly fail when you still haven't taught those assassins a lesson?" 13 smirked. "In fact, you should treat this Empyrean boar tusk as if it was that assassin organization. You should smash them to oblivion. Do they really think that they can crush our family so easily? Those fools who looked down on you, ridiculed you, and called you a coward, are the same fools who would not even last a single blow from you." The 7-year-old then rested his hand on Gerald's hand that was holding the hammer in a tight grip. Rough hands covered with calluses he gained from doing his best to fight alone in Solterra in order to provide for and support his family. Hands that picked up the sword and, now, the hammer to give his children a better tomorrow. "No, Pops," 13 said firmly. "You will not fail. Smash those who stand before you. If they refuse to submit and yield, force them to submit. If they refuse to yield, then smash them repeatedly until they do. No one is allowed to step on our family. No one is allowed to ridicule us. No one is allowed to look down on us. All those who dare to do so must be crushed." Gerald felt his blood boiling after hearing his son's words. He was right. He had been working tirelessly for many years in order to support his family without the help of his father. The number of people who looked down on him when he chose to marry Alessia instead of a daughter from one of the other prestigious families was countless. But that didn't make him back down, and he proceeded to marry for love, not for political ambitions. Then came the assassin organization, Death Wish. They, who had been hired to assassinate him for who knows what reason, had forced him to take another path. As a proud warrior, how could he not feel angry? How could he not feel depressed? Even though he fell in love with blacksmithing, he still wanted to return to Solterra. To show the fools who thought that they could make him yield and the fools who thought that they could step on him and make him submit that he would crush them all. With hate and anger fueling his strength, Gerald smashed his hammer down on the Empyrean boar's tusk. Each blow sent sparks flying in every direction. His hammer swings were no longer filled with doubt and uncertainty. They were filled with firm, powerful resolve to crush all the foes who dared to stand before him. All the haze that clouded his head disappeared, and only the sound of his hammer permeated his mind. The martial technique, hammer for all seasons, started to circulate through his body, creating golden flames that covered his hammer with its radiance. Gerald was unaware of what was happening as he was too focused on his work to notice anything else. He glared at the Empyrean boar tusk in front of him as if daring it to stand against him. As if waiting for that moment, the spirit of the Empyrean boar emerged from its tusk and roared at Gerald. Gerald roared back and smashed the head of the bastard who dared to roar at him. He continuously pummeled the poor creature until it was forced to submission. Minutes passed. Hours passed. Days passed. 3 days passed. Finally, when the sun was at its highest peak at noon, Gerald smashed his hammer for the last time. His breathing was ragged, and sweat drenched his entire body. He had neither eaten nor slept for the past 3 days because he was too immersed in what he was doing. Only when he had finished his craft did all the exhaustion wash over him like a tide, threatening to drag him into their depths. But Gerald held on, wiping away the saliva that seeped from the corner of his lips. He looked at his creations with pride. "You did well, Pops," 13 said as he handed Gerald a potion to drink. "I'll handle the rest." Gerald nodded and drank the potion that 13 had prepared for him. After he emptied the vial, a strong sense of drowsiness assaulted his senses. He then laid down on the ground with his arms spread wide. A few seconds later, loud snoring sounds echoed inside the smithy, making 13 smile faintly. His father had truly worked his ass off for the past 3 days, hammering intensely with conviction and resolution. And with that, he had finally unlocked the final requirement of the martial technique, hammer for all seasons. Failure was part of their craft, but as long as one had an unyielding resolve to move forward despite the setbacks, without a doubt, one would find their way to greatness. Even 13 didn't expect that his father would achieve what he had pulled off during the past 3 days. In front of him, there were 4 completed pieces, and all of them were of the adamantine rank. A great sword, a shield and 2 short swords. Empyrean Great Sword. Rank, low adamantine grade. Active abilities, none. Passive abilities, indestructible. Weapon type, Great Sword. Weight, 20 kilograms. Empyrean Great Shield. Rank, low adamantine grade. Active abilities, none. Passive abilities, indestructible. Armor type, Shield. Weight, 50 kilograms. Empyrean Short Sword. Rank, low adamantine grade. Active abilities, none. Passive abilities, indestructible. Weapon type, Short Sword. Weight, 10 kilograms. The indestructible passive skill, although rare, was much sought after by crafters. Since most items could only have up to 3 skills maximum, they wanted to have the indestructible trait on one of them. This would ensure that the equipment would never be destroyed, making its value higher. To think that he could forge 4 pieces using the last Empyrean boar tusk, it really is a windfall, 13 muttered. Even if he only crafted one, it would have been enough help to recover all our losses. With 4 of them, we're rich. We're filthy rich. 13 couldn't help but laugh out loud, drowning out his father's snoring. After he finished laughing, he gave his sleeping father one last glance before taking out several Jinn and Magian cores from his storage ring. It was now his turn to turn the adamantine equipment into mythical equipment, which would make the Leventis family cough out mouthfuls of blood the moment they saw them. Alessia had been feeling anxious over the past few days since her husband and son hadn't left the smithy for nearly 5 days straight. The only reason why she hadn't barged inside the smithy to check their condition was due to the fact that the meals she prepared and left for them were always eaten, and a note would always be there when she came to retrieve it. She could easily tell that it was her son's handwriting since her husband's handwriting reads like a language that hadn't been discovered by mankind yet. In short, it was complete sh*t. Much worse than chicken scratches. On the last note that she received, 13 mentioned that they were in a critical phase, so there was a possibility that they wouldn't be able to eat anything or leave a note. However, it was also firmly stated that, no matter what happened, none of them must go inside the smithy, specifying that if their concentration were broken, it might cause a backlash. Suddenly, a powerful fluctuation reverberated in the surroundings, making Alessia, who was currently taking care of Remy and supervising Mikhail's and Shasha's training, look in the direction of the smithy. At that exact moment, a heavenly apparition appeared in the sky above their residence. A golden sword glowed brightly, and the roar of a dragon reverberated in the surroundings, causing the Leventis family, who governed this part of the Aldebaran continent, to look at the skies in awe. "What is happening?" Lady Callista asked as she looked at the sky. "Hans, do you know what is going on?" "No, Lady Callista, but—" Hans' gaze became solemn. "Whatever it is coming from the direction of young Master Gerald's house." Lady Callista's eyes widened in shock after hearing her butler's reply. "Get the car, Hans," Lady Callista ordered. "Wait, never mind. I'll just go there myself." Lady Callista then jumped high in the air, creating a small platform to step upon, using it as a springboard to dash forward. Hans didn't hesitate to follow his mistress, activating his own skills to catch up to her. Tricia, who didn't have such skills, sprinted toward the garage to use the car herself. No matter what happened, she must be by Lady Callista's side in order to provide support just in case she was headed to a battlefield. The patriarch of the Leventis family and Michael also moved in unison. But before they left, Arthur ordered everyone else to stay in the residence and prepare for any kind of attack. This was the first time they were seeing such a thing, so they didn't want to leave their family residence unprotected. With the two strongest members of their family off to check the scene, the others didn't bother to go. Instead, their guards, as well as the fighters of the family, were on high alert, prepared to deal with any kind of situation that might arise from the phenomenon that they were seeing at this moment. Arthur and Lady Callista exchanged glances with each other as they traveled side by side. Hans and Michael were only a few meters behind the husband and wife, doing their best to keep up with the two in front of them. The golden sword in the sky was starting to disperse, but they had seen where its sword tip had been pointing. In a forest, located at the base of the mountain, which was private property owned by Lady Callista, stood Gerald's home. Arthur hadn't even bothered to visit this place even once in the past because he didn't want to see his disowned son as well as his family. But now, after seeing that heavenly apparition, as well as the power it possessed, he was compelled to go and investigate. This was especially true since it was within the territory he governed. When they arrived at the scene, they found Alessia and her children standing in front of the smithy with worried looks on their faces. Lady Callista landed beside them and asked her daughter-in-law what the current situation was. "I also have no idea about what happened, Mother," Alessia replied. "All I know is that Gerald and Zion have been working together on some kind of project in the smithy and haven't left it for 4 days. I was told to not disturb them no matter what because they were in the critical phase of their creation, and they didn't want to suffer any backlash." Lady Callista and Arthur frowned after hearing her reply. The first thing they wanted to do was barge inside the smithy, but now, they decided to just wait for the time being. Although Arthur had disowned Gerald, he wouldn't do anything foolish as to harm him intentionally, especially since his wife, Lady Callista, was there with him. "Michael, stand watch outside and make sure that no one comes here to investigate," Arthur ordered. That heavenly apparition could be seen for miles, and I'm sure that the other families are now aware of it. Feel free to call the sentinels to stand guard, but do not allow them to enter within 1,000 meters of this place. If anyone from the monarch clans or the prestigious family asks what is happening, tell them that I'm just trying out a new martial skill. Now go." "Yes, Father," Michael replied as he moved towards the main gate of the residence. "Hans, help Michael to guard the surroundings," Lady Callista ordered. "Don't even let a fly enter this residence. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, my lady." Hans bowed respectfully before doing as he was told. Arthur and Lady Callista then stood in front of the entrance of the smithy with calm expressions on their faces. They were very curious about what was happening, but they didn't do anything reckless and simply waited for any signs of movement on the other side. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait long. After an hour, the doors of the smithy opened and an exhausted-looking Gerald came out. "Alessia, stay here with the kids," Gerald stated. "Everything is fine." He then looked at his father with a smug smile on his face before making a gesture for him and his mother to follow him inside. Lady Callista and Arthur glanced at each other before following their son inside the room. Arthur didn't like the smug look that his son had given him because he felt as if Gerald was looking down on him. However, when his eyes landed on the 4 pieces of equipment on the table in front of him, his eyes widened in shock, making the smug smile on Gerald's face widen even more. "Tis," Lady Callista stuttered after seeing the equipment on the table. As a champion, she could clearly feel the power that was emanating from them, and it was something that she had only felt a handful of times in her life. In special gatherings hosted by the 5 monarch clans and the 10 prestigious families, the monarchs would sometimes personally attend these events. It was also a time when everyone would be able to gaze at the mythical weapons in their possession, which radiated the power and authority belonging to someone who stood at the apex of the world. These pieces of mythical equipment were giving her the same sense of oppression that she hadn't felt for many years, which made her look at her son in disbelief. "Why you made these?" "Lady Callista." "All 4 of them?" "Who else, Mother?" Gerald replied. "Do you think Zion was the one that made them?" "What a joke." The corner of 13's lips twitched after hearing his father's reply. Clearly, his pop's success had gone over his head, forgetting the fact that the one who had made the finishing touches was his 7-year-old son, who was standing beside the table. Of course, 13 didn't say this out loud because this was part of their plan. They wanted to make Arthur and Lady Callista believe that the one who had crafted the mythical equipment was Gerald, which would skyrocket his importance to the Leventis family. It wouldn't even be an exaggeration to have them start calling him Ancestor now. After all, only 6 pieces of mythical equipment existed in the world. 5 of them were in the hands of the 5 monarch clans, and the last one was in the possession of the head of the central government, Lawrence Seaton. But now, Lady Callista and Arthur were looking at not 1, not 2, but 4 pieces of mythical-grade equipment in one place, which was more than half of the mythical equipment that humanity currently possessed. Impressive, right? Gerald stated. I'm planning to auction them, so I can get some cash. I'm sure that the 5 monarch clans and the central government will go crazy over them. Haha. Gerald's boisterous laughter echoed inside the smithy, making Arthur have the strong urge to slap his unfilial son, who planned to sell the mythical ranked equipment to their rival families. Silly boy, why would you auction them when you can just sell them directly to the family? Lady Callista, who was the voice of reason, decided to intervene before her husband slapped her son silly for annoying him. Why not? Gerald replied with the same smug smile plastered on his face. I mean, even a single piece will fetch billions. How could I possibly not do it? Gerald didn't even bother to look at his old man because he was certain that the latter was feeling very angry despite the calm expression that he was showing right now. It had been many years since Gerald felt this good, and knowing that his old man was doing his best to control his anger was making him feel incredibly satisfied. Name your price, Arthur said in a calm manner. The Leventis family will purchase them all. That's right, Gerald, Lady Callista commented. Good things must stay in the family. Gerald rubbed his chin as if seriously considering his father's offer. I think even if the Leventis family liquidated all their funds and sold all of their properties, they would not be able to buy off all 4 pieces of equipment. I mean, this great sword alone would be enough to buy the entirety of the Leventis family. Listen here, you brat. Arthur was already reaching the limit of his patience while listening to his son's nonsense. For Gerald to say that the entire fortune of his family only amounted to a single piece of mythical equipment was absurd, and this was something that he couldn't stand hearing. But before he could do anything, Gerald casually tossed the great sword to his old man, and the latter caught it by reflex. The moment Arthur caught the sword in his hand, he understood that what his son had said a moment ago was the truth. Just how? Arthur looked at the great sword in his hand in surprise. How did you? Arthur wasn't able to finish the rest of what he was going to say as he immersed himself in the information that was flooding his mind. The great sword in his hand only had 4 abilities, breaking the 3-ability rule that was known in Pangea and Solterra. But that was not all. There was an additional passive ability that could be gained if the user was wielding 2 pieces of the mythical set that Gerald had crafted. There were pieces of equipment in Solterra and Pangea that worked in sets, creating a special effect when the items were used at the same time. This would then give birth to a 4th skill, or perhaps another boon. Because of their special features, others preferred to use set equipment. But even if the set bonus was excluded, the 4 abilities that the great sword possessed were more than enough to become the foundation of starting an 11th prestigious family. Empyrean Great Sword. Rank: Low Mythical Grade. Active abilities: Heaven's Wrath. Passive abilities: Indestructible, Auto-Sharpen, Heaven's Blade. Unique set ability: if the wielder is using 2 Empyrean equipment, they would gain the passive ability, Swift-Footed. Empyrean Great Sword, active. Empyrean Great Shield, inactive. Empyrean Short Sword, inactive. Empyrean Short Sword, inactive. Swift-Footed. Increase the wielder's movement speed by 100%. Weapon type: Great Sword. Weight: 20 kilograms. A/N. In this story, the indestructible ability focuses more on items not breaking and have no relation whatsoever on the overall performance of the equipment. There are abilities in this world that can blunt sharp objects, etc., rendering them ineffective in battle. The true reason why the adamantine great sword jumped to the mythical rank was because of the Heaven's Blade martial technique. Only those who could wield the blade would gain this kind of martial technique. 13 also made sure that the core concepts of this technique couldn't be shared with anyone, making it an exclusive item bonus. For example, there was certain equipment that allowed you to cast skills like Fireball. However, once you unequipped these items, you would no longer have the ability to cast them. This was the same concept that 13 used for the Great Sword, only allowing Arthur to use the Heaven's Blade technique when he was holding it in his hands. As impossible as it may sound, Arthur would completely forget the knowledge he gained the moment he tried to share this technique with others. This was the only way to make the patriarch of the Leventis family understand that only he would be able to wield this powerful technique, aside from 13's family. Arthur instinctively knew that the Heaven's Blade martial technique surpassed the Leventis family sword art. What did that mean? It meant that the martial technique had stepped into the mythical or even the legendary rank. Of course, this was far from the truth. Arthur didn't even bother to consider that the technique he just learned was a divine rank technique that was tailor-made for the Leventis family sword art, which was Heaven's Divide. So am I right or am I right? Gerald asked in a provocative tone. That great sword alone is enough to put the entire family into bankruptcy. What makes you think that you can purchase the other pieces of mythical equipment from me? Arthur handed the great sword to his wife, who had a curious look on her face. The moment she gripped the handle of the sword, she immediately understood why her son was able to boast the way he did. Arthur then greedily looked at the remaining 3 pieces of mythical equipment on the table, making 13, who was observing his grandfather, laugh in his heart. He took the bait, 13 thought. Now, the true negotiation is about to start. Arthur didn't know that he was being played by the father and son combo of Gerald and 13. If he only knew that the 7-year-old who was looking at him from the side was the mastermind of it all, he would probably change his opinion of him and hold him in high regard. However, 13 didn't need Arthur's recognition. What he wanted was to make the patriarch of the Leventis clan dance on the palm of his hand, allowing him to reap the benefits that would help him overcome the restrictions that were placed on his body by his no-good father in heaven. If he only knew that the system god, Deus Ex Machina, couldn't stop his lips from twitching after seeing that his no-good son was using all the loopholes at his disposal, and had even managed to extort one of the most powerful individuals in the worlds of Pangea and Solterra. Arthur picked up the great shield, which immediately transformed into a vambrace the moment he touched it. He casually equipped it in his left hand, and with a thought, the shield once again appeared in all its glory. Empyrean Great Shield. Rank: Low Mythical Grade. Active abilities: Aegis, Domain Breaker. Passive abilities: Indestructible, Reversal. Armor type: Shield. Weight: 50 kilograms. Aegis. Once the skill is activated, the shield will create a barrier of invincibility around its wielder which would last for a minute. This skill can only be used twice a day with an hour-long cooldown after it is used. Reversal. Passively stores the damage received by the Great Shield over time. Once the shield reaches its maximum capacity, its wielder can unleash the stored power inside the shield as an offensive attack. Domain Breaker. Sacrifice a Tier 7 Jinn or Majin core to activate the skill. Once the skill is activated, this shield will automatically dispel any kind of domain in its surroundings. A hiss escaped Arthur's lips as he read the information of the mythical shield in his hand. Usually, people were unable to see this kind of information, so he was very surprised that he was able to see it. Little did he know that 13 made it so that only Arthur and Lady Callista could see the descriptions of the mythical weapons. Others would only see a blank information screen, even if they used an appraisal device. This was to ensure that no one would be able to know what the mythical weapons could do. Simply put, in the eyes of others, the priceless equipment that Gerald created was just ordinary pieces of equipment in the adamantine rank. Even if a monarch were to look at it closely, they wouldn't see anything amiss and treat it like an ordinary weapon that had the indestructible ability imbued in it. With the Empyrean Great Sword and the Empyrean Great Shield, even Arthur would have the confidence to fight toe-to-toe with a monarch. The only reason why thrones couldn't fight against monarchs was because of their domain. Inside these pseudo-worlds, a monarch's strength increased by leaps and bounds. With the skill Domain Breaker, Arthur wouldn't have to worry about that anymore. Although the price for using the skill was a Tier 7 Jinn or Majin core per use, the Leventis family currently had 6 of them, which was a good thing. Arthur then glanced at the 2 Empyrean short swords and checked the information they had as well. Empyrean short sword. Rank: low mythical grade. Active abilities: death is only the beginning. Passive abilities: indestructible, dual-wielding mastery, riposte. Weapon type: short sword. Weight: 10 kilograms. Note: if the one who wields these mythical weapons is Callista Leventis, she will be able to equip them as long as her rank doesn't fall below the champion rank. Death is only the beginning. Raise the dead and make them fight for you. Maximum number of creatures that can be raised is 4. Reanimated creatures cannot surpass the rank of the wielder of the Empyrean short sword. Dual-wielding mastery. The one who wields the Empyrean short swords will become an expert in dual-wielding combat. Riposte. Increase attack speed by 100% for 10 seconds after making a successful block, parry, or deflection. 2 set bonus. The active, passive, and unique abilities of the Empyrean short swords will only be available if they are wielded at the same time. If the wielder is using 2 Empyrean short swords at the same time, they will unlock the unique skill Heaven's Blade. The corner of Arthur's lips twitched after seeing the note at the bottom of the weapon description. Mythical weapons could only be exclusively used by people with the rank of thrones and above. No champion in existence could wield such powerful weapons because their ranks were not enough to contain its power. Although he was surprised, he didn't feel bad about it. After all, if this mythical weapon was meant for his wife, then it meant that it would stay within the Leventis family. This weapon comes in a set, Arthur thought. Also, no one can wield them aside from Callista. The patriarch of the Leventis clan glanced at his wife, who had a sweet smile on her face as she held one of the Empyrean short swords in her hand. Gerald's mother was proficient in using short swords, but she wasn't as good when it came to dual wielding. She would usually fight with a short sword and a round shield. But with the Empyrean short swords, she would be able to dual wield without any problems. Are you really planning to auction the great sword and shield? Arthur asked. Since the short swords had his wife's name on them, he didn't think that the 2 equipment were meant for auction. Of course, Gerald replied. I already repaid my debt to the Leventis family by giving Mother these 2 mythical short swords. Any more would be a big loss for me. What do you want? Arthur inquired. There was simply no way that he would hand the 2 other pieces of mythical equipment to the other families, whom he considered to be his rivals. Oi, old man, didn't you hear me earlier? Gerald asked with a frown. The Leventis family's wealth is not even enough to buy my great sword. What makes you think that I would sell it to you, huh? Arthur sneered as he grabbed the great sword and pointed it at his unfilial son. The great shield was already equipped on his left arm, and he had no intention of giving it away no matter what. Huh? So, you are going to resort to this, huh? Gerald snorted. He gazed at his father fearlessly because he knew that he wouldn't dare to harm him, especially since he was able to craft 4 pieces of mythical equipment. In short, if there was a rank for blacksmiths, then Gerald would be the one and only mythical ranked blacksmith in the world of Solterra and Pangea. Only a fool would hurt, antagonize, or kill such a talent. Arthur was not a fool, but he also had no intention of relinquishing the items that were already in his hands. Lady Callista was about to step up in order to break the tension in the air when, suddenly, they heard a clapping sound inside the smithy. Calm down, everyone, 13 said with a smile. Pops, you shouldn't make things difficult for Grandma and Grandpa. How about you let me handle the negotiations? Zion, stay out of adult matters, Gerald replied in a disapproving tone. You already know that this old fart disowned me, and I have no intention of returning to the Leventis family. With the exception of Mother and my sister, Sandra, all of them can be left to rot for all I care. Pops, calm down, okay? Let me negotiate with Grandpa. I'm sure that the 2 of us can reach a compromise. And why would I let you do that, huh? the great sword and the great shield will be auctioned. That's final. 13 sighed before shifting his gaze to his grandma. Grandma, please take Pops outside first in order to calm his head, 13 stated. I'll talk with Grandpa while you cool him down. Seeing that her dear grandson was trying his best to decrease the tension in the smithy, Lady Callista grabbed her son's hand and pulled him away despite his protests. After regaining her rank as champion, Lady Callista had even made a breakthrough, reaching the peak of the champion rank. A mere grandmaster like Gerald was not a match against her, especially when it came to brute strength. When they were the only ones inside the room, 13 faced the patriarch of the Leventis family with a devilish smile on his face. Everything that had been exchanged between him and his father was part of their act. Now that the stage had been set, 13 chuckled internally. There was simply no way that he wouldn't extort the old fart who disowned his father, especially after all the hardships they had to endure up to this point. Well then, Grandpa, let's start to negotiate, 13 said with a smile. Don't worry, I'll give you an offer that you can't refuse, and I'll even convince Pops to no longer pursue the auctioning of the great sword and great shield like he originally planned. Arthur looked at the 7-year-old in front of him and nodded his head. He had no idea that after the negotiation was over, 13 would have complete control over the earnings of the Leventis family, as well as the spoils that they gained on a regular basis by going on expeditions in Solterra. 10%, Arthur stated. 30%, 13 countered. 15% and that's final. 20% or we auction it off to the monarch clans. I'm very sure that they will be more than happy to spend billions for these 2 pieces of mythical equipment. Arthur clicked his tongue before glaring at the 7-year-old, who was looking more and more like a scammer in his eyes. Back then, when he saw 13 at the party 2 years ago, Arthur had to admit that the 5-year-old had street smarts. But now, he was being forced to agree to the demands of a boy who hadn't even gone on his first wandering. 20% of the monthly earnings of the Leventis family, as well as priority picking for high-ranking monster parts. We will also have a 20% discount based on the market price for each individual part, 13 stated. The Leventis family will also surrender 1 complete monster corpse of any rank 7 djinns or magens killed or captured during the month. If the Leventis family is unable to meet this condition, you are required to surrender 5 rank 6 monsters or 10 rank 5 monsters in good condition. If the Leventis family breaks this agreement, any other mythical ranked equipment that my father crafts in the future will be auctioned off, no questions asked. This deal will remain active for the next 100 years. As long as the Leventis family follows these conditions, they will gain priority to negotiate for the acquisition of any piece of mythical ranked equipment that Gerald Leventis will successfully create in the future. Arthur frowned as he looked at the contract papers that 13 had placed on the table in front of him. He didn't know how the 7-year-old was able to come up with these terms and even produce a contract right away. This can only mean one thing, Arthur thought. He had already anticipated that Gerald would succeed in crafting mythical equipment and that I would come here to negotiate the terms for their acquisition. The more Arthur thought about this possibility, the more he felt as though this grandson of his was not an ordinary boy. Well then, do you accept the conditions, Grandpa? 13 asked. If so, please sign here, here, and here. Also don't read the small text over here. It's just a small clause that is not important. Arthur of course read the small clause that was typed in very small text that only someone like him would be able to read. Should any payment become overdue, the terms hereunder shall be subject to a permanent increase of 1% per month on the outstanding balance. Such adjustments to the terms shall be irrevocable, notwithstanding any subsequent resumption of regular payments by the Leventis family. Arthur ripped the paper in half and glared at his no-good grandson, who casually took out another copy of the same page he tore a moment ago and neatly placed it in front of him. Don't worry, Gramps, I printed 100 copies of this contract. Also, the file is saved in my PC, so I can make more copies if necessary, 13 said in a polite and respectful tone, which only gave Arthur the strong urge to slap him silly. When is the due date for payment? Arthur inquired. On the 25th of every month, 13 replied. Paying past that date will increase the terms by 1%. Arthur clicked his tongue before reading the rest of the contract. With the power he wielded, he could not abide by these silly terms that his grandson was demanding of him. However, the confident look in 13's eyes made him hesitate. If he were to do that and Gerald was truly able to produce more mythical ranked equipment in the future, then Arthur would lose the chance to get first dibs on them. He was certain that if any of the monarch clans were to learn that his disowned son was able to craft mythical ranked equipment, they would do everything in their power to bring him under their wing. The patriarch of the Leventis family wouldn't be surprised if they tried to adopt Gerald, giving him their family name, granting him a high position in their family, and providing him countless resources to ensure his loyalty to them. In terms of resources, the 10 prestigious families couldn't match the power and influence of the 5 monarch clans. They stood at the apex of humanity for a reason, and even if he were to possess the 2 pieces of mythical equipment, Arthur would still be very wary of antagonizing any of them. Tell me, do you think your father will be able to make mythical-grade equipment again? Arthur inquired as he looked at the 7-year-old with a solemn tone. Although the chance of crafting mythical ranked equipment is abysmally low, the fact remains that Pops crafted 4 of them, 13 replied calmly. Since that is the case, what is stopping him from crafting more? Also, if Pops manages to get his hands on a rank 8 or even a rank 9 monster part, then crafting a legendary grade equipment would not remain a pipe dream. Arthur narrowed his eyes after hearing about the possibility of Gerald crafting a legendary equipment with that monster rank. There had been a handful of times in the past 300 years when they faced off against a rank 8 monster and retrieved its body parts. However, even the best blacksmiths in the world had only produced peak-grade adamantine equipments from these monster parts. The possibility does exist, Arthur thought. I'm sure the world will be shaken to the core once a legendary equipment appears. What Arthur didn't know was that if 13 had been given enough time and resources, 13 would have been able to create a piece of legendary equipment. But he didn't do that. One of the reasons was that his father would be unable to wield it, and 2, only monarchs would benefit from it. Since arming those bastards wasn't part of 13's plan, he would have to settle with arming Arthur and Lady Callista first. He would need to use the Leventis family as a shield to face the brunt of the storm for their family. As long as they were able to endure a few years, then all was good. A few minutes later, 13 and Arthur left the smithy. One of them was smiling, while the other had a solemn expression on his face. Naturally, the one that was smiling was none other than the 7-year-old boy, who managed to strike a deal with his grandpa. I'll send Michael to deliver the agreed amount as well as the monster parts in a few days, Arthur stated. For the time being, none of you are allowed to leave your residence. The other families are snooping around, so I will assign guards to protect this place to prevent them from doing anything foolish. The patriarch of the Leventis clan then looked at Gerald with a complicated look on his face before walking past him. Make sure to not do anything too flashy for the next few days, Arthur stated without even turning back. Let's go, Callista. Lady Callista nodded before shifting her gaze to Gerald and his family members. All of you take care. I will be visiting again in 2 days. Her gaze lingered on 13 for a few seconds before she turned around to follow her husband, who was already walking toward the gate of the residence. Once he was certain that his father and mother were truly gone, Gerald looked at his son, who gave him 2 thumbs up in reply. A sigh of relief then escaped his lips before he decided to walk toward the house in order to sleep. He was dead tired and badly in need of sleep. 13 followed behind him. Just like his father, he was exhausted as well. While the 2 people responsible for creating such a commotion were sleeping, the Leventis family became busy dealing with the 5 monarch clans, as well as the 10 prestigious families, who were all curious about what had transpired inside Arthur's domain. After the successful negotiation between 13 and Arthur, funds started to pour into the bank account of their family. The Leventis family's monthly average income was 400 million gold coins. And this was only the earnings of the family's various businesses in Aldebaran and the city they call their home in Solterra, Warrington City. Their branch families owned other businesses under their name and would only send a percentage to the main family as a tribute for allowing them to use the family name to conduct business. The monster parts, Jinn, and Magian cores were not included in this average earning. The reason for this was simple. Such resources were used to nurture the outstanding talents of the family. Monster parts were sent to blacksmiths, alchemists, and other crafters, who would put them to good use. The Jinn cores would be used to upgrade the ranks of their people, allowing them to become stronger, so they could serve the family better. When 13 asked for the complete corpse of a monster, this included everything, even its core. High-ranking monsters could only be hunted by the elite hunting teams of the family. It was for this reason that 13 insisted that they be given a complete corpse, as well as the priority to buy monster parts for a discounted price. Arthur reluctantly agreed to this condition because 13 promised him that the Leventis family would get first priority when Gerald crafted other pieces of mythical ranked equipment. Of course, 13 made sure that the equipment were only bound to Arthur and Lady Callista. He had asked the patriarch of the Leventis clan to drop his blood on the Empyrean Great Sword and Empyrean Great Shield to have them bound only to him. This meant that no one else would be able to use the two pieces of mythical equipment. He also asked his father, Gerald, to talk to Lady Callista, telling her to bind the two short swords to herself, which she did the moment her son told her to. After their transaction was done, over 80 million gold coins were transferred to Gerald's account, making him very happy. The good thing about it was that they would consistently receive the same amount monthly, allowing their family to live comfortable lives. Gerald no longer needed to go back to Solterra to go on expeditions and could just focus his attention on crafting gear to sell to his father or equip his family with. Currently, Gerald and Alessia were not in the house. They had gone to the Leventis warehouse to choose a suitable monster corpse to bring back home. Michael had already given them a list of monsters in their inventory, but 13 insisted that his father go to the warehouse so that he could personally check the quality of the goods. As someone who had risked his life to collect monster parts in Solterra, Gerald knew very well if something was good or not. Also, 13 wanted his father to personally give a statement to the Leventis family. And that was, "Don't try to cheat us or else." He also told his mother, Alessia, to go with his father just in case he became too hot-headed and started to cause a ruckus. Many in the Leventis family didn't like Gerald, so it was possible that he would receive some snide remarks from the workers of the warehouse. In order to prevent trouble, it was important for Alessia to be there, keeping her husband in check. The Leventis family gathered their materials through expeditions in Solterra, in addition to clearing dimensional gates that appeared within the Aldebaran continent. Dimensional gates appeared very often. They were like rain that came and went as it pleased, and they would appear anytime and anywhere. In Oakheart City alone, where the Leventis family ruled, Tier 1 to Tier 3 dimensional gates appeared frequently. The moment their artifacts detected that a gate had appeared, an announcement would be made in the city, telling everyone to go to the evacuation centers and underground bunkers that were prepared for such an event. The Wanderers would then either enter the dimensional gate to fight the monsters in the world of Solterra or wait for them to come out before dealing with them. While the couple was at the Leventis residence, 13 was busy training Shasha and Remy back at their home. It was almost lunchtime, so the three of them were about to take a break when suddenly, Mikhail appeared on the training ground with a pale expression on his face. "Zion, we have a problem," Mikhail shouted. "There is a gate outside our home." 13's expression immediately turned serious after hearing his brother's report. "What kind of gate?" 13 asked. "Did you see how many minutes are left?" "I didn't take a look," Mikhail stuttered after seeing the intensity in his brother's gaze. "I immediately came here the moment I discovered it." 13 frowned, but he knew that time was of the essence, so he immediately asked Mikhail to carry Remy and take her to the fortified basement of the house. "Shasha, go with them as well," 13 ordered. "I'll go and see what kind of gate it is." Shasha nodded and ran after Mikhail, who was carrying Remy in his arms. When 13 arrived in front of the residence, he saw a white portal, which was the color of a Tier 1 dimensional gate. The first thing he did was take out his cell phone and dial a number. Fortunately, after 3 rings, his father picked up, and from the sound of his voice, he seemed to have gotten himself a good deal. "Hello, son, did you miss me?" Gerald asked. "Pops, I just called to tell you that a Tier 1 dimensional gate appeared in front of our house," 13 replied in a calm manner. "How many minutes?" 6 minutes. A curse escaped Gerald's lips before he hurriedly told 13 to take his brothers and sisters to the underground shelter. "We'll be back soon," Gerald said anxiously. "Protect your siblings until then." After saying those words, Gerald hung up, which meant that he and his wife would rush home as fast as they could. 13 then ran toward the house and headed to the underground basement, where his other siblings were hiding. While running, he also contacted someone who would be able to help him with his dilemma. "Hans, it's me," 13 said as soon as his call went through. "I don't have time to talk, so listen carefully. A tier 1-dimensional gate appeared in front of our house. Send help, hurry." "Right away, young master," Han replied curtly before cutting the connection. As 13 entered the basement, he made sure to lock the 3 steel doors that served as the defense for their underground bunker. "I messed up," 13 thought with annoyance. "I became too lax and forgot about this possibility." Usually, a tier 1 gate wasn't a problem, especially since his mother, Alessia, was with them. Even if she was alone, she could easily handle dozens of rank 1 djinns, especially after learning the martial technique, Dance of Solaris. However, 13 had asked her to accompany his father to the Leventus warehouse to prevent any problems from occurring. He didn't expect that, during their absence, a tier 1 gate would suddenly appear. And to make matters worse, it appeared right in front of their house. Their residence was located at the base of a mountain, which was surrounded by forest. They were a good distance away from the city, and even if his parents hurried to get back home, it would still take them half an hour to arrive. Hans, on the other hand, could arrive faster. But even with his most optimistic estimates, the butler would not arrive until 20 minutes or so. Truth be told, 13 wasn't too worried about tier 1 djinns breaking through the defenses of their home. In fact, he was confident that they would not even know that there were children hiding in the basement of the house. What he was worried about was the leader of the pack. Tier 1 gates had at least 1 up to 3 rank 2 djinns that led their group. They were the true threats that worried 13. A rank 2 monster might not be able to destroy the steel walls that protected the basement instantly, but given enough time, they would undoubtedly succeed. At that moment, the ground shook, and the lights flickered a bit. 13 lightly covered Remy's lips to prevent his little sister from screaming or making a sound. He didn't really care if their entire house was destroyed after the rank 1 monsters had rampaged to their heart's content. Their house could be rebuilt with the money they now possessed. But if he or any of his siblings died, no amount of money could bring them back to life. Mikhail and Shasha gripped their weapons tightly as they looked at the steel door in front of them. They could hear something trying to attack the first steel door, which served as the basement's first line of defense. Their breathing was starting to become ragged as the adrenaline pumped inside their bodies. The two of them stood in front of 13, who was covering Remy's lips with his hand. Inside the basement, there was a weapon rack with many different kinds of weapons on display. Mikhail and Shasha took an axe and rapier, respectively. 13 had trained them to hold real weapons during their training so that they would be able to get used to their weight and familiarize themselves with them. Although 13 was confident that his siblings would be able to win in a one-on-one fight against a rank 1 monster, they were still too young to handle rank 2 monsters and above. Also, this was a monster outbreak. They wouldn't just be fighting 1, 2, or 3 monsters at the same time, they would be fighting dozens and even hundreds of them, which was why most wanderers prefer to fight inside the gate than let the monsters attack them in their own world. Suddenly, the sound of an explosion erupted, and the loud metallic bang that reached their ears made Remy start crying. Although she was now 4 years old, she was still not ready for this kind of encounter in real life with the monsters, which she had only seen on television. Even the faces of Mikhail and Shasha, who had been training to fight these monsters for when they arrived in Solterra, were very pale. Even so, they stood their ground, holding their weapons at the ready. Another loud explosion resounded, and this time, 13 decided to let his sister go. "Don't worry, everything will be fine," 13 said to the crying little girl who was crouching beside him. "Woo-woo." Now that her brother wasn't covering her mouth any longer, Remy's cry spread inside the basement. 13 had no choice but to let her go since he couldn't let Mikhail and Shasha fight alone. He didn't hesitate to run to the weapon rack and take 4 daggers from it. The 7-year-old then stood in front of Mikhail and Shasha, making his two siblings calm down a bit. In their eyes, their brother was the strongest among the three of them. Seeing him stand in front of them increased their morale, lessening the fears that were starting to take hold of their senses. 13 placed 2 of the daggers beside his feet, while he held the remaining 2 daggers in each hand. The steel door in front of them suddenly shook, and indentations of what seemed to be a head appeared on its surface. They could now hear the grunting and squealing sounds in front of them, which made 13 smile bitterly. If I have to make a guess, we'd be dealing with a boar-type djinn, 13 thought as the steel door was once again rammed from the other side, showing the indentation of a creature with a tusk on its metallic surface. Then it happened. A head of a boar poked through the steel gate and locked its gaze on the 4 juicy children that made its mouth salivate. A squeal of triumph escaped its lips, but before it could pull back its head to charge again, a dagger flew in its direction, hitting its eye. A loud squeal of pain and anger reverberated in the surroundings as the boar freed itself from the steel door. It was a rank 2 vagabond boar, and from the looks of it, it wasn't alone. Another boar peeked into the hole and looked at the boy who had harmed one of its comrades. 13's face turned grim when he realized that the peeking boar was bigger than the one he injured. An alpha monster. 13 gritted his teeth as he threw the other dagger in his hand towards the boar, who was looking at him with ridicule. The alpha vagabond boar didn't even bother to dodge, and simply moved its face to the side, making 13's dagger hit its tusk. The dagger then bounced harmlessly away, resulting in a metallic clinking sound as it fell to the ground. As if getting tired of teasing the children, the alpha vagabond boar took a few steps back before ramming the steel gate with its body. The indentation on the gate became bigger and bigger with each blow, making Remy cry louder. Finally, the steel door fell on the floor with a loud thud. Mikhail and Shasha subconsciously took a step back the moment the steel door was destroyed. With their last line of defense broken down by the rank 2 alpha monster, there was nothing that would stop the boars from devouring their prey. However, instead of being swarmed, the rank 1 boars didn't move, as if afraid to anger the leader of the pack, who walked confidently inside the basement and eyed the delicious meat that was ripe for the picking. Mikhail, Shasha, don't move. 13 ordered. Stay where you are. Despite the hopeless situation in front of them, 13 remained calm and stood his ground. He was like a staunch pillar that stood to protect his family from harm. Even in the face of such a threat, his experience as a system made him calm like the surface of a still lake. The alpha vagabond boar didn't like the fact that the boy in front of him wasn't feeling despair in its presence. Because of this, it decided to eliminate the boy holding the daggers first before feasting on his siblings, whose faces showed fear and desperation. Come! 13 shouted. In reply, the vagabond boar squealed angrily as it charged forward. 13 didn't back down and also lunged forward, his daggers thirsty for blood. A moment later, a loud crash reverberated in the surroundings, and the ground was dyed with fresh blood, which painted it the color red. 13 lunged at the charging Alpha Empyrean boar, which was a rank 2 monster. There were 4 types of monster classifications: normal, alpha, field boss, and world boss. Each one of these monsters was stronger than the last, and the 7-year-old was currently facing something that was way above his league. Even so, he didn't back down. The 3 children behind him were his family. This was a new concept for 13, who had lived most of his life as a system who helped his hosts. Now that he was starting to learn the emotions of humans, he had a strong urge to protect the children behind him. Also, there was one other reason why 13 decided to take the initiative to charge alone and not involve his siblings. He didn't know if he was right or wrong, but according to his calculation, there was a 70% chance that he was right. Just as boy and boar were about to clash, a barrier wrapped itself around 13 and his siblings, protecting them from harm. Suddenly, the ceiling above their heads collapsed. A figure impaled the boar's head with a spear, penetrating its head all the way to its neck, killing it instantly. Michael then pulled back his spear before adjusting the glasses on his face with his hand. The blood of the alpha vagabond boar dyed the ground red, creating a gruesome sight. Shasha had covered Remy's eyes to prevent her from seeing such a gruesome scene. She knew that her little sister was still too young to see such carnage, so she shielded the latter from the scary things that she would eventually face, but not until several more years. "Good job protecting your siblings," Michael commented. "I'll take it from here." The right-hand man of the Leventis family snapped his finger, and countless black spears protruded out of the ground, piercing the vagabond boars and killing them instantly. In just a span of a few seconds, the threat of the monster outbreak ended. "Don't leave here yet," Michael ordered. "I'll double-check to make sure I didn't miss a few gins." 13 nodded as he remained standing between his siblings and the dead monsters. Michael glanced at the 7-year-old a few seconds longer than he intended before walking away. Only when he was gone did 13 breathe a sigh of relief as he looked at his shaking hands, which were holding 2 daggers. Although their residence was quite a distance away from the Leventis residence, it was impossible for them not to know that a dimensional gate had opened in their territory. Arthur was a throne. It was a rank designated for kings and queens. As a throne, he had the ability to sense any disturbance within his domain. This was especially true for the appearance of a dimensional gate. 13 was certain that the moment the gate appeared in front of their residence, Arthur had sensed it and immediately made preparations. In fact, 13 was sure that his grandpa was observing them right at this very moment. Perhaps he was testing them, wanting to see how his grandchildren would react in such a situation, to evaluate their performance and decide if they were worthy of the Leventis bloodline. "What a sick bastard," 13 cursed in his heart, but he didn't let his emotions show on his face. He purposely allowed the gate to manifest and unleash a monster outbreak just to see 4 children feel fear and desperation. Perhaps he plans to use this incident to make Pops owe him a favor for helping us. 13 didn't need to be a genius to understand what kind of game Arthur was trying to play here. He knew that his grandpa was very annoyed with how the negotiation ended because 13 played the old man in the palm of his hands. A few minutes later, Michael returned and told them that it was now safe to leave the basement. 13 nodded and made a gesture for his siblings to follow behind him. Just as he expected, their entire house had been demolished. Even the smithy was destroyed. It was as if a hurricane had passed through their house, making it look like the scene of a disaster. 13 looked at the place where the gate once stood and saw Hans looking at him with an apologetic gaze. The 7-year-old nodded his head in understanding. It seemed that Hans managed to arrive on time, but someone had prevented him from interfering. Since it was Michael who came to save them, this meant that Gerald owed him a favor. Of course, he also knew that this was what Arthur wanted to happen. Just this once, 13 vowed as he turned around to look at his siblings, who were still shaken by their first encounter with the jinns. However, the 7-year-old was pleasantly surprised when he saw that although Mikhail's and Shasha's faces were still pale, a look of determination could be seen in their eyes. The corner of 13's lips curled up after seeing their faces. It was great that their near brush at death only made his brothers and sisters' resolve stronger. He could see that they, too, didn't want to feel helpless like this again, which would only push them to reach greater heights. "I guess this is a blessing in disguise," 13 thought. "It seems that the old bastard did something good after all." 13 then looked at the wreckage of their house and rubbed his chin. He wasn't too worried about the cost of rebuilding the house because, right now, they didn't lack money. The house and smithy could be rebuilt, but lives couldn't be replaced once they were gone. The 7-year-old then glanced in the direction of the Leventis family's residence, where he could feel a stare boring into his small body. "I'll remember this, old man," 13 sneered. "You better prepare yourself to cough out blood the next time we negotiate." 13 was someone who kept grudges, and he would certainly repay them in full. For now, he closed his eyes and used his experience as a system to design a blueprint for a house that wouldn't be destroyed, even if a rank 8 monster and their legion knocked on their doorstep to invite themselves for lunch. "Ooh!" Remy bitterly cried in Alessia's arms. Near her, Gerald was talking to Michael and Hans. The two had arrived 10 minutes after the monsters had been dealt with, and the first thing they did was to check on the conditions of their children. Both were relieved that, aside from being shaken, their children were safe from harm. Gerald thanked Michael and Hans, who had come to their rescue, and his brother told him that he should be more careful next time. Michael then told the couple that a team of workers would soon arrive to collect the corpses of the monsters, as well as help Gerald clear out the wreckage of his house. Just as the right-hand man of the Leventis family was about to leave, he patted Gerald's shoulder and pointed at 13 with his chin. "You have a good son," Michael stated. He stood in front of his brother and sisters against an alpha vagabond boar. "You raised him well." After saying those words, he finally left along with Hans to return to the main residence of the Leventis family. Gerald then looked at his son, who was seated on one of the destroyed walls of their house. The 7-year-old had his arms crossed over his chest, and his eyes were closed as if deep in thought. Gerald had no idea what was running through his 7-year-old son's head, but he decided to talk to him and praise him for what he had done during the monster outbreak. "Zion, you did well in protecting your brother and sisters," Gerald said. "What kind of reward do you want?" "I promise that I will give you anything you want." "I want all the money in our family's savings account," 13 replied in a heartbeat with his eyes still closed. "Son, don't you have a heart?" Gerald nearly forgot that his 7-year-old was no ordinary child and thought differently from the kids who were the same age as him. "Relax, Pops," 13 said as he opened his eyes. "I was just joking. Well, I want you to give me full access to our savings. I want to personally design the layout of our house to make sure that not even rank 8 monsters can destroy it." "Oh." Gerald's face eased up after hearing 13's words. If other kids were to tell them this, he would probably slap them for saying a bunch of nonsense. But since it was his 7-year-old son who said this, it only meant one thing. He would be true to his words and do as he said without fail. "Then in that case, you can have as much money as you want," Gerald replied. "It's not our money that we will be spending anyway." 13 and Gerald smirked at the same time because this was true. All the money they had in their savings accounts came from the Leventis family, so they didn't feel too hurt when splurging to rebuild their house. "Pops, let's stay in a hotel for now," 13 said. "I still have to draw up the blueprint of our house. After that, you can start looking for construction workers to build it. Our family's personal gateway was also destroyed, so we need to ask the Leventis family to build us a new one. It won't definitely be cheap." "I'm sure of that," Gerald grumbled in a bitter tone. "Oh, just tell them that if they don't do it for free, then we will leave Oakheart City and settle in Rose Lake City," 13 said with a shrug. At first, Gerald was taken aback, but this surprise didn't last long, and a smirk appeared on his face. "You're very petty, son." Gerald chuckled. "I'm sure my father will curse you to the heavens when he hears this." 13 smirked because his father was right. He was indeed being petty. Rose Lake City was the main city of one of the monarch clans that ruled the Aldebaran continent. If there was one family that Arthur hated the most, it was none other than the Remington clan. This was 13's way of telling Arthur that he should not push his luck too far, or the deal was off. Even though their contract stated that the Leventis family would get priority in negotiating with him when it came to the mythical equipments that Gerald would make in the future, that didn't mean that they were not allowed to sell it to others. Of course, that was just a bluff. After all, he really couldn't sell any of the mythical equipment that had been crafted with the help of his rune magic. Such a threat held no power whatsoever. But Arthur didn't know that. Since that was the case, 13 would just bluff his way and give the patriarch of the Leventis family a headache. If their family really moved to Rose Lake City, no one would be able to stop Gerald from selling his crafted equipment to the Remington clan, who had enough wealth to cover the entirety of the Aldebaran continent with the palms of their hands. "But, son, I don't have the guts to tell this to my old man," Gerald said in an awkward tone. "Weakling." 13 shook his head helplessly before dialing a number on his cell phone. A moment later, the call was picked up, and Arthur's gruff and arrogant voice sounded on the other side. "What?" Arthur asked in a cold tone. Unfazed by the blatant indifference in the old man's voice, the 7-year-old replied in a casual manner, "My family's personal gateway was destroyed," 13 said. "I want the Leventis family to build us one for free. If you refuse, we will start packing and move to Rose Lake City. That's all." Without even bothering to hear Arthur's reply, 13 cut off the call before jumping off the wall he was sitting on. Gerald watched his son walk away as if he had just told a servant to pick up his laundry for him. This son of mine has nerves of steel. Gerald didn't know if he should laugh or cry at Zion's blatant disregard for the patriarch of the Leventis family. He probably inherited this trait from his grandma. Meanwhile, at the Leventis family, a chuckle escaped Lady Callista's lips as she observed her husband's expression. Arthur looked like he had just eaten a fly, making the beautiful lady chuckle. After mastering the martial technique that 13 had imparted to her, not only did she regain her youth, but her power also increased by leaps and bounds. Currently, she, Arthur, Michael, Hans, and Tricia were inside the patriarch's office, discussing what should be done with Gerald's family. Lady Callista was very annoyed that her husband had allowed the monsters to destroy her son's home. She had come to complain, but after hearing 13's demand, all her annoyance disappeared and was replaced by amusement. This brat is going too far. Arthur slammed his fist on the armrest of his chair, obliterating it completely. Serves you right, Lady Callista retorted in disdain. My son may be afraid of you, but my grandson is not. It seems that you got played well, Arthur. Now, what are you going to do? The beautiful lady's words were filled with contempt as she looked at her husband, who was currently fighting the strong urge to strangle the 7-year-old boy who had just given him a subtle threat. Arthur reined in his anger and glanced at his son, who was standing beside him. What is your opinion of this child? Arthur asked. You observed him closely from start to finish, right? Michael nodded. It seems that we are greatly underestimating this nephew of mine, father. Although he's still young, he's able to manipulate people and take advantage of their weaknesses. I would not be surprised if he is the brain inside my brother's household. Although it may seem impossible, I have a hunch that Zion is the one calling the shots in their family. I suggest that we do as he says for now. It would be a waste if their family truly moved away from this place and went to Rose Lake City. If that happens, we won't be able to monitor their movements even if we tried. Also, if Gerald decides to make the Remington clan his business partner, there is nothing we can do about it. Hans, who knew a bit of 13's capabilities, couldn't help but nod internally at Michael's evaluation of the 7-year-old boy. He even had a fleeting thought that he would rather antagonize the Leventis family than antagonize 13, who was shrouded in mystery. Fine. Arthur clicked his tongue, feeling very annoyed by the situation. For the first time, a throne like him, who was only a rank below that of a monarch, felt helpless. Not to mention that it was all because of a 7-year-old. If his peers were to know about this, he would definitely become the laughingstock of their social circle, which Arthur didn't want to happen. Also, I advise that we try to settle this matter peacefully. Michael fixed the glasses on his face. I think that Zion is suspecting that we let the gate unleash a monster outbreak. He is not to be underestimated at all costs. Arthur frowned, but he didn't say anything to reject his son's proposal. In the end, he merely told Michael to handle it himself, washing his hands on this incident. Lady Callista was quite satisfied with this outcome, so he decided to leave the office with Hans. There were less than 5 months remaining until Mikhail's first wandering, and she wanted to spend some time with her grandson and teach him the ropes of what to expect when he appeared in Solterra for the first time.